Testing. Seems like my work area just grows. All right, it's 6:01. Good evening. We'd like to welcome everyone to our school board meeting. Today is Tuesday, June 6th. The time is about 6:01. Members present in the boardroom, we have members Wilson, Jacobs, Holloman, Higgins, and Donley, as well as Bellamy. Member Lessons is excused tonight. We also have Dr. Bryant, our superintendent, and we have Ms. Foster, our executive assistant, I'm sorry. And with that, I'd like to ask everyone to stand for the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that brings us to our land acknowledgement. Member Wilson.
We acknowledge that we gather here today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina people of the Upper Cook Inlet. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina people have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. ASD is committed to diversity and inclusion, and it is with the honor and respect that we recognize all Indigenous people who live and learn in our community.
Thank you. And again, we'd like to welcome you to our meeting and thank you for attending and supporting the work of the Anchorage School District and this board. We'd like to thank our students, of course, our parents, teachers, our staff, our business partners, the entire community for your investment in our district with your time, your talents, and your tax dollars. And that brings us to item 3, the approval of the agenda.
Madam President, I move to approve the agenda as written. Second.
Moved and second to approve the agenda as written. Is there any opposition to the motion? Not hearing or seeing any opposition, the agenda is approved as written. We do not have because it's summertime, we do not have our student representative, but I'm sure he's listening to the meeting. So we will welcome him back at the end of summer. And that brings us to our goal monitoring. Item C on the agenda is our goal monitoring. So we're ready for our conversation. Keep in mind, tonight we will have 2 conversations, 2 separate conversations. Our first conversation will be on interim goal number 1.1, which is our reading proficiency goal. And the second conversation will be on interim goal number 2.1 of our math proficiency goal. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome the staff, of course. Welcome, you guys. But I'd like to confirm that all 4 components are present in both of the reports that we were given at our last meeting. Both reports clearly show what is being monitored in that its focus is on a specific goal and interim goal. Both reports shows data for the 3 previous reports, the current reporting period, and the target reporting periods. Both reports show the superintendent's evaluation of performance, and both reports show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's evaluation via the tables that are provided, and it also indicates next steps. So with all those components present, we are ready to begin our conversation, our reading conversation. We'll start with reading. So for the purpose of understanding the current reality of our students as compared to this goal, this is our reading goal, goal 1.1. That goal reads, it's right there. You can read it for yourself, but that interim goal, the percentage of K2 students at or above reading benchmark on interim assessments, FastBridge curriculum-based measures will increase from 37.5% in the spring of 2021 to 80% in spring of 2024. You can also read the primary goal there. So once the board fully understands the current reality, then we will move into the how questions. That is a category of questions that looks to the future as to what the superintendent has planned in response to the data. So with that logic model in mind, we are ready to begin our conversation. So Dr. Bryant, you want to kick us off? I see the staff is here.
Sure. Yes, we're joined by our academic services leadership team. So we'll go ahead and open it up to any questions you have about the how.
Okay, so we're going to save the how for the end, but the what, the who, the what, and there's another one. But anyway, we'll save the how to last. So one of the questions, and I know that a couple of board members sent in. I usually start with member lessons, but she's not here, so I got to hold up. I got to do good here tonight. She did send in her questions, but one of there's this. I get a lot of questions about. Okay, so we moved from peaks to people were used to peaks. They were used to FastBridge. They're used to all that terminology, but they're not used to M-class, they're not used to, so can we get like and I know the board had a work session early on that kind of, I think there were columns and you showed what was and what is. So can somebody just give a brief overview just for the sake of parents who are listening and they're trying to understand?
Thank you for the question, Madam President. So we did move to what's called M-class through a vendor called Amplify, but the actual measure is called Dibble's 8th edition. It's been around forever. Not unlike FastBridge, it's, and I'm going to use a few terms and I'll define them. It serves as a curriculum-based measure. These are small, discrete skills, things like letter sounds, oral reading fluency in 1 minute. These are research-based measures. Very similar to FastBridge, to be honest. They might have a slightly different name or nomenclature, but the types of measures are very, very similar. And so these individual skills are research-based indicators of risk. So it's like if you go to the gas station and you check your oil, it's a dipstick, if you will, and it tells us that there's something going on here, or maybe we're on track. And then we use other tools that are diagnostic to help us figure out what that particular need might be. And so in essence, yes, that it did change, but the types of measures are very similar.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know and very helpful. So if we go to slide 6, there are a couple of questions here about M-class. Is there a difference in how kids are screened with M-class versus fast screen? Now you touched on that just a little bit.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I read that question. I believe it was from Member Lessons, Madam President. We are using testing teams. And so individual teachers are not doing the benchmark screeners. And so we have folks that are highly trained that go from school to school, along with a couple of folks that we're training in the schools to build capacity. So the methodology is really the same.
Okay, great. So her second question is, do M-class end of year measures reflect different measurements than the start of the year?
I'll take that one too.
Yeah.
So the actual individual measures are the same throughout the year. However, depending on how a student does in the fall or the winter, there's something called a gating rule. All that is a fancy term that says if I'm doing, if I'm really struggling, I might stop the assessment because it would not provide useful information to keep going on a more specific measure. Or in another case, a student's doing quite well, so it opens a gate to kind of get better diagnostic information. So the measures measures actually will be the same throughout the year, but individual students might have slight variations on which ones that they will receive depending on how well they do.
Okay, thank you. Question, now, anybody else have a question? Member Jacobs?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So if the two screeners, our new one that we're transitioning to is at least somewhat similar, I understand we're working on the baseline M class now. Can we, to what degree can we lean on prior data before this baseline?
I'll take that one too. We actually met with a psychometrician. That's a fancy word for, people with PhDs that study statistics to kind of talk to us about these different measures. It's really suggested that we don't try to actually compare the measures, even though they have very similar measures on each of the assessments, because there are some slight variations in terms of the research and how it is implemented. For example, just to give you some background, as an example, M-Class starts at slightly lower level skills to provide access to some kids who might be considered struggling, because it provides us a little bit more nuanced detail in our diagnostics and finding out better information on where their gaps are. And so in essence, the psychometricians do suggest that we do not compare them from one to the other. It's not totally reliable to do that.
Did you have a follow-up? Okay. All right, let's go to page 9. Well, hold on. 6. Yeah, page 9. I'm always, when I look at, I know we are work in progress, and I do believe in continual improvement. This chart always tells me the same message, that we are doing well with some kids, some groups, and we're not doing well with others. And I think I know what that means. But when schools look at their data, what is it that they're looking at to try? What I'm trying to say is, how do they interpret the data to try to get kids moving forward?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll
You're the
start.
assessment
Yeah,
guy.
absolutely.
Sorry.
I'll start and we can pass it off. Number one, I just think it's really important to have perspective. And when we come to a data meeting or next year during our PLCs, when we're looking at student data, it's really important to get a well-rounded picture. First of all, we never make decisions based on one point of data. And so that's just tremendously important. And so with that said, though, what teams are going to do is when they see, again, these are indicators of risk. So when they drill down to the individual student level, and then they will look at further measures, things like a phonics screener, or they might look at attendance, or they might look at discipline information, and they try to create a well-rounded picture for each student so that we're addressing their specific needs. With the new curriculum adoption, some new interventions, I'm very hopeful that we are going to have even better tools to really diagnostically assess individual kids to meet their needs.
Okay. Dr. Belcher.
What I could add to that is we have a current MTSS framework. We're redeveloping it so that it aligns to the Alaska Reads Act. Part of that will come the individual reading improvement plan. That will align to what we had within our MTSS framework, the TIF, the targeted intervention forms. Those are overlapping. The data will be inserted, but in there, and multiple measures of data will be included in that document. But then how we monitor kids in terms of what interventions they need, monitoring their interventions through progress monitoring, and then making decisions within a few weeks to determine, do we continue with the interventions or do we change the intervention, so that we're constantly monitoring each student's data piece to make sure that improvement is happening. So when we're looking at big picture data, we're not only looking at what we see here on the slide, but we're also looking at growth within the schools. And so it will look different from school to school, and each school will have different needs. And then on our big picture on our end, we'll have to look at the whole picture throughout each
Mhm.
school.
So do you think that will change what our monitoring reports look like? Maybe in the
I'm
future?
optimistic that
Okay.
yes, I feel very optimistic that it'll look different. We are now going to start using M-class interventions and Boost, and it kind of has, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but it kind of has like an artificial intelligence where it really, when the student takes a diagnostic, it really outlines what that student needs, and then it puts them on a path of intervention for them so that they can work on what they need as they go through the program.
Yes, Member Donnelly?
Yeah, I'd like to go over the graphics on page 4 and the graphic on page 8.
4 and 8?
Yeah. So on page 4, using the former system of doing the assessment in the winter semester or quarter, it's looking like it was about just south of 38% proficiency in reading. And for the 2022-23, which if you carried that out from where we were in 21-22, that's no improvement. Because that was at 38%. But by adopting this new way of measuring it, if you go to page 8, now all of a sudden it seems to have jumped to 57% proficiency. That's like a 20% jump in the assessment just because we're using a different new system to do the assessment. I'm very skeptical of that. I don't believe that, given that in the fall, the number was 40%, in the winter, the number was 38%. All of a sudden now the proficiency of our students has jumped 18 to 20%.
And
I can start on that.
Okay.
I can comment on that. I had the same skepticism. What I would say though is when I spoke with the psychometricians with Dibbles 8, they had skepticism about the other assessment. And so that's part of that conversation, speaking with both Fastbridge folks as well as the folks at Dibbles 8. They are both highly researched, tools. They have slight variations on how they assess, but some of the measures themselves are relatively similar. I cannot actually comment on the specificity of why that gap is there, but I've asked those exact same questions. And really what we're going to do is we're going to watch that over time and go through our process with MTSS. But I think it's a very valid question. And even the folks with the PhDs could not rationally explain what that difference might be. And both of them suggested a little skepticism in each other's program, if you will. And so in the end, the goal though will not change. We will follow that MTSS structure. We're going to look at the very specific diagnostics for each individual, provide those interventions on those gaps, and then watch data over time. What I will say is, just like when you adopt anything new, I would expect over the next couple of iterations that there might be some variability, just like when you adopt a new curriculum or you're learning a new sport, there will be some variability that we're going to have to work through. And so we're addressing that along the ways, but it's a reasonable question.
Just to follow up.
Follow up.
So the target of 80% was set under the old standard.
The old,
If this new,
under the old what? I'm sorry.
what's that?
What did you say? It said under the old?
Yeah, it was set under the old way of measuring it.
Oh, okay.
So now for changing the way we measure it and we've jumped 18%, why is the target still valid at 80%?
I'll start on that one. Thank you for your question, and other folks can jump in. But when you look at research between response to intervention, RTI, and MTSS, we use something, you'll see a triangle, and 80% is what we would typically shoot for to meet the needs of our students in core instruction, regardless of the program or application that we're using. And so that's a very standard research-based figure used in educational decision-making, regardless of which program it is. What I would say is over time, if we see gains, which I hope that we will, some of you as a school board and us with our interim goals can look at that, because our goal is to always improve.
And that is part of the conversation, Member Donnelly, that we are hoping to have during our retreat relative to the that very question. Member Wilson.
And I'm referring to page 5. I don't know if that's helpful, but can you provide an overview of the plans for communicating information, or the information that will be communicated to families to help our families understand how they can support their student?
So thank you for the question. To the board, through the Alaska Reads Act requirements, as well as through M-Class, which is part of the Alaska Reads Act requirements, there is an expectation of quite a bit of parent communication to understand, one, how to interpret the results, what the testing is, as well as we are required and will be providing families with home support. So what it is you can do at home, what families can do, and the home support that we will be providing will be targeted to the skill gaps that the students have. So instead of just saying, do this with all kids, if a student already knows, let's say, their letters, we wouldn't be having a parent practice letters with the kids. We'd be moving on to the next step within the reading continuum. Just like you wouldn't just say, read this book to a child who doesn't know any letters. And so those are the things that we will be providing. The Alaska Reads Act requires that information within 15 days of the screeners at the beginning of next school year. And then we'll go from there.
Yes, follow up.
If I can add to that,
Of course.
the how we're going to communicate, not only this portion, but all that's going to come up in the next year is part of our project management plan as well. And it's right now #1 in our agenda. So we met today. We didn't get to that part of it, but we're going to meet again this week, and we're rolling out a plan and working with communications to make sure we have a strong rollout.
Great. So my follow-up was going to be, which I think you probably addressed that you're working on it, was would the parents have the expectation that they would receive that information from their teachers? But it sounds like you guys are going to work on the details of that.
We're hoping that that comes in many different forms so that every parent gets the information, because we know that there's so many different ways parents will receive the information from us.
And I could just comment really quickly to wrap that up. It will be posted in Parent Queue. They're going to receive electronic information. We're going to send home paper copies, and we're going to have it available during conferences. So we've already had that conversation, kind of thinking about equitable access to that information and how to support your kids.
And our ELL department is already on it, making sure that they have it in as many languages as we can get done this summer. But all of course of our major languages.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's great. All right, let's go to Member Higgins, and then we'll come back to Member Jacobs.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments in regards to the drastic changes in scores, and I find that interesting. But I look at it from a third angle. One is trying to explain whether it's valid, whether it isn't valid. But whether it goes up or whether it goes down, or whether it goes flat, you kind of want to know why. So if it did go up substantially, what's the speculation on why and in regards to it? Because that will give us an idea of what something to continue in doing it. And if it's, I know, but then if it's not accurate, what are we wasting our time on, right? I appreciate that too. But I just, when we see results going up or down, I'm more focused on what are we doing different, or what should we have done differently? And so that's kind of it's really got me thinking, what could we have done? If it's true, if the results are valid, what's the speculation on why?
Thank you for your question. I'm not going to go into deep speculation, but what I will say is, again, I just want to reiterate that both of these measures come from very reputable research-based organizations. We're spending a great deal of time training and calibrating with our staff to ensure high reliability. And again, this was the very first time that it was implemented. And so as we look at this data over time, I believe we're going to see indicators that are going to be really useful in determining whether our instruction and our interventions are moving us in the right direction. To speculate exactly why that occurred, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that.
But we could keep it in the back of our brain and bring it back later. Member Jacobs.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. My understanding is that the M-Class screener is the Department of Education's choice. So this will be implemented by all districts, not just ASD. Is that right?
It's 96% of the districts, I believe, is the latest statistic. Yeah.
Okay. And a follow-up, if I might.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. Have we examined, or I guess maybe our partners with this contractor relayed that other districts are seeing similar jumps? I mean, I'm certainly glad that the indicators are moving in the positive direction. And because we didn't choose the screener, I think there's some fidelity there, or at least markers of fidelity, but curious if we've looked at what other districts are seeing.
So I did have conversations with the psychometricians on a general level. Typically, what they see, I mean, is that there are oftentimes even small drops. And so there are some indicators that something is going well, but it is a change in the actual measurement. And so again, just like I wouldn't read in one direction, I'm not going to read too much into the other direction. It's really about creating validity over time and really ensuring that we're calibrated. And then again, going back to that conversation about MTSS and individual kids, this data is about finding the individual needs for individual kids. And again, we have diagnostic tools that we follow up with to sort of triangulate, if you will, which is always a best practice when looking at data.
I would say in terms of the other school districts, most of the other school districts did not pilot this spring. So they did small scale pilots up until now with individual schools or individual classrooms. We were one of the few districts that did a full scale pilot to bring everybody on, or first to bring it on to everybody. Most of the schools will be going in next year as in the fall as their first time doing it with everybody in their school district.
We wanted to make sure that we could get a comparison between the spring and the fall so that we could actually have the teachers really see this whole thing.
Yeah.
That's why we did the full pilot with all the schools.
But the pilot was in the spring. In the fall, we use a different, no,
No,
it was
I'm
the same.
talking about we're in the spring now, the fall being the
Okay,
first
okay,
one this
I got
next fall.
Okay,
We're already working on next year.
okay, okay. All right.
Madam President, I have another follow-up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
Yep. Thank you. So this is actually dovetailing with something Member Wilson said earlier. I think it's exciting that we're having communication directly with parents related to this data that we're going to be getting. Is this the first time we've had something like this, or has that data existed elsewhere previously?
No, parents have always had access and data has been shared with them. It's been we've always posted it to Parent Q. Schools share it at conferences. Letters are sent home, but as of right now, it's going to be a required aspect.
And if you're in summer school, you're gonna get it every week. So that's all I'm saying. There was one more question on Member Lesson's list, and it had to do with fluency. I can't quite find it, but it's something about the importance of fluency and the difference between M-Class and FastBridge and fluency.
So yeah, we looked at that. So I think what she's referring to is many of the measures have the term fluency in it. So letter sound fluency, and really it's just a reference to automaticity. And so there is also a measure that's in all of these different metrics called oral reading fluency, and that's where you're actually listening to a kid's rate and accuracy. And so, but in M-Class, fluency is used with many measures, and really it's a reference to automaticity.
Okay. Any other follow-ups? Member Jacobs?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I think we transition at some point into hows like we usually do. So
Yes.
before we move on to our other report, I wanted to ask one last item. I'm hopeful this is an exciting question, but anything about vision would be helpful. As both ASD and then Massachusetts School District move towards implementation of additional learning opportunities and continuing education for our teachers through the PLC model, how do we see that supporting this work, and then the data that hopefully we'll be looking at after the fall assessment?
I would say that our PLC time is going to be directly affecting what our teachers are going to be doing in the classrooms around the CKLA implementation. Our teachers right now are going to be coming in 2 days early and get training, so that they're going to be here 2 days before they normally would report to be able to get training. We have so many different groups standing up trainings over the summertime. We had groups over at ASDSA. We are doing as much as we possibly can, but the PLC time is going to be like real time, weekly,
Golden.
able to be able to implement this stuff, working with their colleagues.
All righty. All right, thank you. So I think this is a good segue into our next report, which is our math report. Any questions from anyone on the dais before I move to member lesson questions and my own? All right, so this conversation is focused on our math proficiency goal. And it's specific to interim goal 2.1. The percentage of grades 9 through 12, I'm sorry, not 3 through 9 students at or above the math benchmark on interim adaptive assessments, which map growth, will increase from 52% in the spring of 2022 to 60% in the spring of 2023. All right, so how are we doing? Who wants to tell us how we doing? This is the spring of 2023. So to start, I joke. Well, I'm being facetious, but I'm serious. Okay. One of member lessons noted, I think as all school board members noted, that there are some small wins in the report, and this is especially in the math report. So can you speak to those wins and and give us your best estimate as to how we can duplicate them or replicate them, or I don't know, maybe we celebrate cautiously or we celebrate wildly.
Sure, I'll take a stab at a couple of the wins that member lessons shared. Looking specifically at the fact that we are on an upward trajectory with our goal, though we are have not met the target and are in fact below the target of the 60% that we had set for ourselves. We are on that upward trajectory. That's for goal 2.1. We did solidly exceed our goal for 2.3, if I'm moving a little ahead there. And then looking at some of the specific groups, the ELL and special education students having a little bit more rate of growth than their peers to help close the gaps, which is definitely part of that work that we want to see continuing moving forward. As we were mentioning, those PLC models, particularly, I anticipate being a major focus of several of those groups.
Okay.
Madam President, I can jump in if you like.
Sure.
Yeah, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Something that I noted, I think, is the difference in trajectory between our sixth graders in elementary and secondary. I'm curious what the leadership team's thoughts are on that data, specifically as it intersects with our transition from sixth graders to middle school. Thank you.
Good question.
It is a good question. It initially jumps out at you. But one thing I just want to caution on is right now we don't have sixth grade across the board. And so when you're comparing elementary to secondary, you're looking at only 3 schools currently. So it does not fully consider the entire Anchorage demographic. And so it's a really tough comparison right now. We have Clark, Baggage, and Mirror Lake that have those in there. And so it's not apples to oranges, so to speak.
Meaning that those students who are in the sixth graders in elementary school, there
Yeah.
would be more of them than there are of.
Yeah, so the sixth graders in elementary school is the entire Anchorage school district, and so it's really difficult to compare a couple of schools to an entire school district. And once the transition occurs, then we're going to see a much more reliable picture. So it would be hard to speculate, I guess, is my point.
Yeah, understood.
If I could add, it was also, if you look at kind of like demographics, it's hard to do that as well. With the kids that we have in middle school right now in sixth grade compared to in the elementary schools. It would be good to be able to have a like comparison, to be able to do that, and we just don't have that.
Member Jacobs, follow up?
Yep, just a quick follow-up, I guess, to that end. Do we, are we thinking through, and as part of the transition for sixth graders to middle school across the municipality, additional training for educators? Are we taking what's going right at the elementary level and seeing if there's things we can apply to middle school? Is there a toolkit that we need to catch up our elementary teachers as they transition to middle school? I mean, what does training and education look like as it relates to making sure that we increase outcomes for this group in particular? Thank you.
I can speak to that. We've, throughout our most recent trainings, our sixth, seventh, and eighth grade has always been treated as a single unit. We've done training with them as a group.
Thank you.
Yes, elementary has been.
Okay. Okay. So let's, if we look at slide 4, can you speak to the decrease in the number of students tested in the fall and spring? Slide 4. Member Lesson's question, she thinks, she wants to know whose data is missing, or is that, so what's up with the numbers?
Sure. I think I understood it. I think she's talking about the decrease
decrease.
from the
Mhm.
fall to the spring is how I read that.
Yes.
You know, one thing that occurred in the spring is this was the first time that MAP, which is where this data comes from, MAP growth, was integrated with AKSAR summative. And so we had a large number of opt-outs that definitely impacted our percentage tested. And so, you know, we've been talking internally about the importance of just communicating the culture to the best of our ability to participate and, you know, kind of put our best foot forward so that we can have a good solid picture going forward. But that is definitely a factor.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Math, on the math report. Okay, I'll go back to Member Lesson's list. Okay, on slides now, and some of this, granted, we will be talking about at our retreat, which is coming up. But she says in slides 6 through 9, do we need more aggressive and or more specific interim catch-up growth goals? Now, that's not, I know you guys can't tell us that. That's the board has to decide that. But what is your thought behind the question?
So I'm just going to take a quick stab at this. One thing I think that's really critically important to remember is that MAP growth is a nationally normed referenced assessment. It means it's a bell curve, right? And so when we look at our data, it's in relation to every student around the nation that participates in MAP growth. And so when you see something like the 40th percentile, it's on a normed curve. That means that nationally and typically 60% of students should be above the 40th percentile and 40% should be below the 40th percentile. If you are typical and large and have a well-rounded demographic. And so what I would just urge is to make sure that we are considering that when we develop goals. To say, for example, at the 80th percentile, if we said, hey, we want 80% of our Right, at the 80th percentile. That doesn't really make sense because typically you would have 20% at the 80th percentile and above. And so I'm not going to go into detail with that, but this is a nationally norm referenced assessment. It's very different than the AK star, which is grade level standards, and different than M class, which are these discrete skills. Do you know your 26 letter sounds? And so I'm not going to go any further with that because it's fairly technical, but it is a really important consideration when setting goals using this type of data.
Okay. And actually, in this case, it'll be the interim goals, which is up to the administration anyway. So you guys get to bring that forward at some point.
And what I would say is, you know, as we're working in CCL and we're starting to think about goals, what do we really want? We want our kids to have opportunity to be able to compete, to think about, can they compete with other kids in Alaska? Can they compete with other students around this nation? And so that map type of normative data is a really good tool for us to measure against, as long as we have a solid understanding of what that means in terms of percentiles.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, so I, again, slide 5. And I mean, we talked about, one of the questions I shared with member lessons had to do with economically disadvantaged kids and whether or not we need to do something more aggressive. So I don't know, what do we need to put more, what do we need to, what do you think we need to do? We need to put more money, more staffing, more. Does anybody have, and I didn't send that one in advance, but member lessons had one that was similar. And maybe hers is better worded than mine.
I can comment just really briefly on it. One thing I just want to point out is that when we looked at a catch-up growth and we look at economically disadvantaged, we're close to 30%,
Yeah.
right? That's at the 75th percentile. So going back to that idea of
Okay.
norm referenced, that
Yeah.
we would expect 25% if it was typical to meet that standard at the 75th. So we are 5% above that. And so I just want to make sure that we're celebrating the small wins. They may not move proficiency levels, but we are above by 5%, which is relatively significant, of kids making catch-up growth that are economically disadvantaged. And so I just want to provide a little bit of sort of a frame of reference there.
That's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions for math? I remember Jacobs, your lights on. You good?
Nope, I've asked my questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I guess, yes, sure, please.
I just wanted to add about the additional, looking at multiple data points, that this is one measure, as Mr. Opitz mentioned, that normative measure. We also have curriculum-based and other measures that we utilize to help measure the growth of our students.
Okay, great. Thank you. We didn't have the panel introduce themselves tonight. Can you just introduce yourself again, please?
My name is Amanda Barr. I'm the math
Amanda.
curriculum coordinator.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Dr. Belt. Everybody.
Dr.
introduce.
Beltran, Senior Director of Teaching and Learning.
Thank you.
Sven Gustafson, Chief Academic Officer.
Chris Opitz, Senior Director of Assessment and Evaluation.
Thank you.
Nicole Somerville, Director of Elementary Education.
All right.
Teaching and Learning.
All right. Thank you, guys. Dr. Bryant, you have any final comments before we close our conversation?
This was a great conversation. As we noticed that there's a lot of work to do, but there are certainly things to celebrate. And as I shared earlier today, with these new assessments, this is also an opportunity to recalibrate our goals so we can measure our successes over the next several years.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, staff. You guys were awesome. Thanks. And I want to thank the board for that conversation. Even though we didn't send our questions in, we got them answered. So I think that's pretty good. So that brings us back to our agenda. And our first hour of public comment. As you enter the boardroom, there is a blue and white sheet that pretty much goes over our audience participation and the rules of the boardroom. But this is the first opportunity of the evening for public comment. We have set aside 1 hour at the beginning of our meeting excuse me, for public comment. Any comments in excess of an hour, the first hour, will be heard at the second opportunity for public comment, which is at the end of our meeting. During public comment, board members will not answer questions or engage in discussion with members of the public. This is your time to speak and our time to listen. The school board welcomes the public to observe and contribute to our meetings through their comments. However, to be productive, our meetings must be structured and civil. ASD conducts public meetings under Robert's Rules of Order, a set of rules for orderly meetings that have been used since the 1800s. These rules require the board and the public to be civil and respectful of each other's opinions and statements. If you have the blue sheet in front of you, you can kind of look at a couple of the rules that are there. Do not attack a member's or speaker's motive. Speakers may point out what he or she believes to be a natural consequence of a board action, but may not engage in speech that personally attack others. Please refrain from disturbing the meeting, and that amounts to no cheering, applause, or outburst. I have to be redirected because I forget that sometimes. Attendees will not be permitted to interrupt the business of the board. No profanity or foul language. There's no place for that in our boardroom or in our process. No waving of signs, flyers, or posters. If you would like to share a handout, though, you can give it to Ms. Foster, and she will share it with, make sure every board member will get a copy. As president of the board, it is my duty to enforce these rules of civility and decorum. As such, and consistent with Robert's Rules of Order, I have the authority to rule any speaker out of order for violation of these rules and or fail to conduct themselves in a civil manner. So with that, we would like to begin our first hour of public comment. I'd like to, and all of them are in person. Constance Quinley, can you come forward, please? Welcome. You have 3 minutes. And halfway through, well, the last 30 seconds, you'll hear a little ding. That just means you have 30 seconds left.
Very good, thanks. Hello, my name is Constance Quinley. I'm an Anchorage resident. My 2 children are now 33 and 36. And in fact, Mrs. Bellamy supervised them at Wendler Middle School, and they did okay. They're contributing members of society, went through their whole education here. But I'm not here tonight to talk about them. I'm here to talk about me. I'm 64. I grew up and attended school in Orange County, California. In 7th grade, I checked out from my public school library a book by John Griffin called Black Like Me. It's a nonfiction story of a white man who essentially dyed his skin black to experience and report on living as a Black in the year of 1959. I followed that with the autobiography of Malcolm X by Malcolm X and Alex Haley, also checked out from the main stacks of my middle school library. These books, which are banned in many public schools across the country, changed me. At a critical time in my development, they gave me a deep dive into a world of injustice that I knew only nominally. As a white 13-year-old girl living in conservative white suburbia, Orange County, California, I needed those books. I'm so grateful they were there. They were in the stacks of my middle school library where I could check them out without question. I'm grateful for the professional librarians of the school district who were allowed to do their jobs. I'm grateful that my classmates' parents and my community didn't limit my access to them. When you hear concerns from parents that certain books shouldn't be in school libraries, I hope you'll not only let the Controversial Issues Committee do its job, but I hope you remember that books can not only affirm who we are, but also help us understand who others are, as those books did for me. Thank you for serving on the school board, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you very much. Next, we have Helena Schmitz. Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Oh, hello. Hagatal. I am Hogiana. I've been on the Native Advisory Committee for 2 years, and I wrote this resolution titled Indigenous Languages at ASD. I know Suella may have come in April to speak on that behalf, and it is dated in November 2022. Even though I am the backbone of this resolution, I do not speak on my behalf. I speak for the entire community. As already shown by the statistics that you were just going over, culture and language will increase that statistic positively. This resolution has been seen by Patola. This resolution has been seen by some in the National Native Indian Education Association. Change is undeniable. It is how you handle this change that makes the difference. I am here today to hold this resolution accountable and this board accountable for this. I am not going anywhere. Since November 2022, I have seen no action from the Anchorage School District Board. Children have been taken out of their classrooms for years for tutoring, special education, or other required activities. Allowing a child to learn the language of this land is undeniably the best education you can provide. You can choose to be a leader in this nationally in this endeavor, or you can choose otherwise. I made this resolution easy. I only had 4 asks. There could have been 16 more asks. I guess those are for another time. They asked where the student needs a space to learn. The student needs internet accessibility. Time spent during school hours is considered in attendance when learning the language. The student needs to be reasonably accommodated to succeed in the extracurricular language program. Another part of this is to allow a partnership with the Dinaina people so their language can become part of the school district and community holistically. And I'm asking for you to create action now. Thank you.
And thank you very much. And I'm assuming we have copies of that. Did you leave a copy for us? Thank you. I'd like to invite David Boyle forward, please. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. President Bellamy, board members, I want to read from a recent article in the New York Times. The subject is how focusing on reading lifts all students, regardless of race and poverty level. The article is titled, quote, Mississippi is offering lessons for America on education by Nicholas Kristof. Quote, the refrain across much of the Deep South for decades was thank God for Mississippi, end quote. That's because other southern states believed that no matter how bad their education systems were, Mississippi would always be at the bottom. Mississippi knew this and decided to take control of its educational system. In the last 10 years, all its energy has been placed into getting all children to read at the 3rd grade level by the end of 3rd grade. On the NAEP test, Mississippi is soaring in national rankings now. Was this accomplished by lower classroom sizes, by social promotion? None of that. Mississippi had a lot to overcome, much more than Alaska. Mississippi ranks dead last in child poverty and 2nd highest in teen births. It was near the bottom of the NAEP test as well. It placed its energy into getting all children to read. Now among low-income students, Mississippi 4th graders are tied for best in reading and ranked 2nd in math. According to David Deming, a Harvard economist, Mississippi hasn't overcome poverty or racism, but it still manages to get kids to read and excel. Poverty isn't the reason kids can't learn. Mississippi proves that. Poor kids can learn. The author says, quote, it's thrilling to see the excitement and pride bubbling in the halls in Black schools in some of the nation's poorest communities, end quote. One of the most important elements of the program in 3rd grade reading test. If a child does not pass this test, he is held back. No social promotion. Would this stigmatize children? No, it actually put accountability in the program. Everyone, parents, teachers, and kids were energized. And about 9% of 3rd graders failed the test in their 3rd grade and 3rd and final attempt. Here's a very interesting part. Those held back did not have any negative outcomes. In fact, They did much better several years later on the 6th grade English test compared with those who had just missed being held back. The state did not reduce class sizes. Instead, it spent the money on teacher coaching and tutoring. So regardless of race, ethnic group, and income level, Mississippi has shown the nation that all kids can learn. Let's not focus on diversity, equity, sexual orientation, and restorative justice. Instead, let's focus on teaching kids how to read, at least by the 4th grade. The Alaska Reads Act has given us the tools. Now let's get it done. This is your core business. And thank God for Mississippi. It has shown us the way. And I have hard copies of the article.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boyle. And if you can give those to Amanda, she will get them to us. Corey Angst, excuse me, Mr. Angst. Welcome, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, President Bellamy.
Mhm.
My name is Corey Aist, President of the Anchorage Education Association. While AEA supports the decision, memo 156 in the agenda, while AEA supports the decision to allocate an additional $6 million to the ASD health plan rather than pass along the $3,000 cost to each participant, your educators would greatly appreciate a thorough and thoughtful discussion regarding this significant expenditure. It would be beneficial to give this topic the same deliberation and attention typically dedicated to constructing new schools, closing schools, reducing programs, or adjusting the pupil to teacher ratio. Please ensure the same level of transparency you claim to follow in your board meeting opening statement. ASD faces a significant budgetary hurdle as it grapples with a forecast that falls short by over $25 million next year. Unfortunately, this shortfall directly impacts the retention and recruitment of our educators, as these funds are now unavailable. Compounding the challenge, ASD has witnessed the departure of over 1,000 educators within the past 3 years. A third of our staff has resigned from the Anchorage School District. This alarming turnover rate has persisted, with more than a third of the teaching staff resigning. Particularly concerning is that half of those who resigned were in their earliest stage of their teaching career within the first couple of years. Our investment in our newest educators. In the spirit of transparency, please share the actual operating costs of the ASD health plan. That information is not transparent in the 23-24 ASD budget book you approved in February. Please share your insights outlining the steps to prevent future cash shortfalls in the plan. The $6 million infusion for your employees was not part of any negotiated agreement and translates to a $3,000 increase in healthcare benefits per participant. I do not see one representative present from the unions that will benefit from the $6 million infusion, but AEA is here. And on behalf of our 3,000 teachers, specialists, nurses, counselors, and related services providers who unfortunately will not receive any financial assistance from the supplement towards their healthcare expense. The 3,000 members of the Anchorage Education Association acknowledge the significant contributions of our educational support personnel, which include all of our totem employees, our BPOs, our ACE employees, food nutritionalists, construction and maintenance staff, bus drivers, and the executive staff seated to my left and behind me. Please remember this gesture of appreciation as your educators begin negotiating a new contract in the upcoming year. Thank you for your time.
And thank you very much. Next, we have Rosalind Weiss. Welcome, you have 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. I didn't realize I was going now. So this is in reference to Juneteenth being added to the calendar. Here we go. So thank you for having me speak. I'm Rosalind, the president of the Alaska Coalition of BIPOC Educators. Juneteenth is a day of celebration and freedom. It was a call for the end of slavery in the United States. It is referred to as the Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, and Jubilee Day. It just became a federal holiday in June of 2021, signed by President Biden with bipartisan support. This is 158 years after the original Emancipation Proclamation by President Abraham Lincoln in January of 1863. I don't think a lot of people realize it wasn't until 2 years later that we were actually freed by some 2,000 Union troops that arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas, to announce enslaved Black people in that state were free by an executive decree. I am here today to say thank you to the ASD School Board and the district for its commitment to being culturally responsive. They to add this to our calendar is extremely important. And again, I would like to say thank you. Thank you from a Black mother, a Black daughter, a Black sister, a Black business owner and entrepreneur, and a future Black aspiring educator. I am honored that you are acknowledging the celebration of our freedom in the Black community, especially here in Anchorage. Following along, like tonight, the Assembly gave us the resolution for Juneteenth, and I was honored to be there and get here as fast as I could. It is important that you are trying to be a representative and respectful of the diversity that is in the city of Anchorage, that are in your Black students here for Anchorage School District. The school board also put in place guardrails as part of their strategic plan. These were based on our community values of Anchorage values. One of those is that the superintendent will not operate without a plan to develop a diverse or culturally responsive workforce. How do we get there? More educators and people of color as educators and leaders in this district, more representation of our community. Anchorage minorities are the majority, with almost 60% of our students being non-white. This board is asking the superintendent to raise the percentage of underrepresented applicants for permanent positions. They are also requiring 100% of ASD school board staff will participate in ASD culturally responsive training by spring 2024. And this matters to all of our community. So thank you for that as well. I hope that you are able to join us in the celebrations that are coming up on the 17th and 18th down on the Delaney Park Strip. And on the 19th, the Alaska Black Caucus celebration at the Denina Convention Center and the NAACP closing ceremonies at.
Thank you very much. All righty, that concludes our first hour. Those signed up for the first hour of public comment. We will now move to item E, the consent agenda.
Madam President, absent any member wishing to pull an item from our consent agenda, I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved in second to approve the consent agenda as presented. Anyone wanting to pull anything? Seeing, hearing?
I'd really like to hear a presentation from the administration on Memorandum 156. I mean, it's $6 million, and I think
Okay.
it'd be.
So you would like to pull 156? Thank you. It will go immediately to action. It will be item 3 under action. Seeing, hearing no others. The motion before you is to approve the consent agenda minus item 156. All in favor? Oh, wait. Do a voice vote, please, because I don't have my.
Member Holloman,
Yes.
Member Wilson,
Yes.
Member Donley,
Yes.
Member Higgins,
Yes.
Member Jacobs,
Yes.
President Bellamy.
Yes. We know that it passed. All right, there it is. 6 yeas, no nays. So all the items under E, except for item 13, which is memorandum number 156, has been approved. Thank you. moving on to our action item F. First item. Oh, can I get a first item on the floor, please?
Madam President, I move to approve ASD Memorandum number 151S, approval of funding allocation of capital improvement funds.
I mean, did you say
Second.
151 or 151S?
151S.
Okay.
Second.
Moved in second to approve memorandum number 151S. Any opposition? Member Dunley.
Well, initially, I'm concerned that the way the substitute proposal reads isn't accurate. The administration had proposed the original, and then some board members requested that it be modified to this reflection to increase the amount that's being proposed to be spent from around 19 million to $45 million. But the S resolution still says the administration recommends that the school board approve and authorize the allocation. So I'm wondering when this, if that's accurate, at some point in time since the last meeting, the administration changed their position. That's confusing to me.
Okay. So my recollection is that the board asked the superintendent to modify 151 or to amend it. So that is why you see the change.
Well, there was no vote. There was no vote by this board to do that. We know
So-
that's absolutely
President,
for
So
sure.
you.
Just a quick
hold on.
point of order.
Okay.
We jumped into discussion on this item. but we have
Right.
Significant public testimony.
Mhm.
So can we?
What I would like to do though, Member Jacobs, give me 1 minute.
Sure.
What I think the safest route forward is for us to accept 151 as it was, and then move to the amendment, the amended version. Prior to,
That's,
Uh,
yeah, we have a motion on the floor to. approve
I know we do.
151, yeah, as amended. And so I think I would propose we vote on that, but I would ask that we return to public testimony.
absolutely,
And so
I agree.
can we return to public testimony and then we'll take a 2-minute at ease after that's done?
So so the motion before us now is to approve memorandum 151S. Are we ready to vote?
Yeah, I object. I
Okay, what are
object to
you-
that, and I'm
state
entitled
your-
to, I'm
state
entitled
your-
to state my objections.
And
to
you
it.
have had your opportunity. We
Yeah.
hear you.
Yeah, but no, I was interrupted by the member's objection.
Yep. So Madam President, my point of order stands. I think we need to circle procedurally. I think we need to circle back to all public testimony in this item. And then we can take up discussion and a vote.
Just,
on-
yeah, because this is not the time to discuss the memo.
Correct.
We're getting it on the floor for discussion, Member Donnelly.
So again, to my point of order, Madam President, I would ask that we return to public testimony and go down our list of speakers from the action item list. If you find that point well taken, I think we can just begin with the first speaker on the list, please.
Okay. So, Member Donnelly, I hear, I'm not sure I understand what your point of order is, though. I do want to try to understand. We're going to have the discussion, but
Yeah.
after public
Well, the
testimony.
public testimony should be on what's on the agenda. And what's on the agenda is 151. And to move something different on the agenda is changing the agenda without a vote. It's changing the order of the process here without a vote. And I object to that.
Well, I guess it's going to come down to the chair's ruling. And I think we can move forward with public testimony on 151. The S version of 151 was attached to the agenda. So, and it exists because we talked about it at our last meeting. You're right, we haven't voted on it, but we will vote on it tonight. All right, so with that, we have several people that are signed up to testify on 151. Bonnie DeArmond, could you come forward, please? Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bonnie DeArmond. I've stood before you many, many times in various roles. Today, I stand before you as the new head of the library at Stellar Secondary and still as a parent at Inlet View. I'm here first and foremost to advocate for student and staff safety and equity in our schools. As you know, librarians are under constant attack lately, and this board has been tremendously supportive on this front. Passing Memorandum 151 would go a long way in putting your supportive words to action. Stellar is in dire need of security upgrades. We are a small school without a security staff. A door buzzing system would help us feel much, much safer. As a parent at Inlet View, we're constantly on high alert for the safety of our children as well. The current building is woefully inadequate. You do not need me to go through the particulars of this because you've heard it from us. I was going to say 3 years, but I feel like it's maybe a decade now. Our little school often feels like it's suffocating. Our trees were cut down. There's a handful of vocal neighbors regurgitating misconstrued facts you'll hear from. The dilapidated building and now we're losing a teaching position. The only IB school in Alaska has fought tooth and nail to achieve this designation. Teaching units of inquiry is near impossible with different grade levels in a classroom too full of students. Our unique program must keep full-time specialists and 10 teaching positions to function in accordance with the IB PYP curriculum standards. We are asking this school board to show its support for all of our students in all of our schools. Please fund capital improvements and keep teachers in classrooms. With this memorandum item, you have proved that both can be done prudently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, David Hanson. Followed by Mike Grunst. Hey, David, welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Hey, thank you so much. My name's David Hanson, and I want to say absolute pleasure, and I would say most importantly, privilege to get to sit in front of you and testify. I am a little taken aback by the single-mindedness, and I hope it's not too derisive, but selfishness of my friends and neighbors in the South Addition who have lobbied and pushed for a rebuild, complete rebuild, a brand new building in a time that we're wildly strapped for cash, rather than a sensible, financially responsible $15 to $10 million less remodel. I think the sort of single-mindedness and selfishness needs to be reevaluated, and I wonder why we as a school board and a school system are focusing on one community in the greater Anchorage area. That's amazing. It's amazing community, absolutely, but there's many amazing communities that all deserve support and all deserve funding. And I'm wondering why we aren't looking at Turnagain as a huge success story, as a state-of-the-art remodel that saved money, didn't just like, why would you spend more money when you didn't have to? And I do wonder why we're so single-minded and why we're so, again, sorry to be derisive, but selfish. I mean, these are my friends and neighbors, and I'm surprised by that. I grew up in the South Addition. I am happy to have been there, and I'm privileged to have been there. Great education and great opportunities arrived from being there. But I do wonder about the other communities whose parents and community members lack the time to come and testify in front of you. So I think we could look to Turnagain as a great example of a remodel that I think it's a great example of a way to save money in a time where we're financially strapped. And I would ask the school board to spread the love and spread the money to the other schools. I think all students deserve leak-free roofs and pipes that work, and not just one school to be rebuilt when it could be remodeled. And I guess lastly, the good news about, the example of Turnagain is it's currently under capacity. So any of the students of Inlet View that might need to be bused during the remodel process could go to Turnagain, which is an excellent school and a great example. Oh, there's my 30 seconds. So I think with that, ask for a little bit more love be spread and wishing you all a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike Grunst? Oh, he's on the phone.
Hey, good evening, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your time. My name is Mike Grunst, and my comments are my own. They do not reflect the views of the Department of Defense, U.S. Army, or the National Guard. To quote the great Madeline Kahn as Lily Von Stoop, I'm tired. I am tired of Inlet View being proposed again and again and again over the objections of the community at large. Just last year, the school board proposed shuttering 6 elementary schools, most of which are younger and in better shape than Inlet View. Only one school was ultimately shuttered. Now we are about to go into a situation that is even more dire. We are continuing to lose students to the lower 48 at an alarming rate. Was it about 3,800 to 5,000 last year? Additionally, as we heard earlier this evening, we're moving to a middle school model across the entire district, something I strongly support. This is going to remove how many 6th graders from elementary schools and put them into middle schools, further decreasing the enrollment rate at these elementary schools. As we move forward, it is time for difficult decisions. We can either waste tens of millions of dollars to prop up a decaying school that has absolutely amazing programs, 110%. Or we can identify that the heart of the school is in the students, the programs, and the faculty. It is not the shell. It is time to dispose of Inlet View, the shell of Inlet View. We need to get those amazing programs, those amazing students, those amazing, amazing teachers and educators and support staff into other schools. So we can prioritize programs, we can prioritize education, and we can stop propping up excess infrastructure that is simply an anchor tied around our students' necks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Petra. Welcome, followed by Martin Hansen.
Thank you. Hello, excuse me. Hello, my name is Petra Wilm, and my youngest child graduated from Inlet View this spring. That means I've been an Inlet View parent and advocate for a decade now. In past testimonies in front of the school board, I've tried cajoling, flattery, admonishment, shaming, appealing. I've brought kids as props. I've worn brightly colored clothes. I've worn neutral clothes. I've passed out large stickers. I've written letters in advance. I've met with school board members one-on-one. I've attended solo, and I've sat in this room surrounded by Inlet View teachers, students, and parents. I've run out of ideas to make the case for fixing up this school. In all that time, nothing at Inlet View has fundamentally changed. So I think tonight I'll address 2 issues dogging this project that I've been too polite to call out so far. NIMBY and the remodel versus replacement argument. NIMBY, not in my backyard. So specifically appropriate for this situation. The neighbors who testified tonight against an Inlet View replacement have no educational stake in this project, only imagined negative real estate stake. Their kids are grown and they were sent to other schools, presumably because Inlet View is not good enough. Or they have young kids who I do not believe they will send to Inlet View because, as we all know, it's a small old building with no clear improvement plan. They will tell you at this meeting that the design is flawed and that they did not have enough say in the process. They are not school designers. They are not Inlet View school users. They are mostly white and older and have much more time on their hands than the parents of kids at Inlet View. The new school will not be in their backyard. It will be on ASD property and built in accordance with all existing codes and zoning laws. They were not owed more sway than they received. If you hand these disgruntled neighbors the reins of decision-making power, they will not go away. If you make decisions guided by political pressure instead of educational priorities, you will hear from this group again, and you will empower every other cranky neighbor of a civic or public project. Secondly, remodel versus replacement and fiscal responsibility. Millions of dollars have now been spent on the school design. Switching to remodel at this point completely ignores the advice of paid design professionals. It wastes the millions of dollars spent on a complete replacement design for the building, playground, and site, and it further delays to the school any improvements for several more years at a minimum. And that's if the neighbors don't weigh in. Wasting millions and throwing more money at a more costly and substandard solution is not fiscally responsible. Inlet View families have never advocated for a specific solution to our aging building. ASD has been the leader and we have followed their lead. We want and deserve a better learning environment for our kids. We want equality with other schools in the district. ASD has determined that a replacement, not a remodel, will get us there, and we advocate for that. I appreciate the creative budget thinking that got a large chunk.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Hanson. Martin Hanson, welcome. You have 3 minutes, followed by Zach Fields.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Martin Hanson. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'm going to ask you, please, respectfully, to vote no on ASD Memorandum 151S. I ask because the $26 million it allocates to Inlet View School rebuild is not needed. I say this because Inlet View School can be rebuilt. And apologies to my son, I see it's inevitable that it will be rebuilt. Can be rebuilt at tremendous savings if it is rebuilt on the north end of the property, the site of the existing buildings, parking lots, drop-off areas, and playgrounds. ASD saves money because the ground, the north end of the property along 12th Avenue, is ready for construction. The ground at the south end of the site of ASD's proposed rebuild, is not ready for construction. ASD saves money because the new school will be rebuilt on top of the demolished old school. No money spent on site rehabilitation. Additional parking and/or drop-off loop should be built along N Street. That's where the existing parking lots are. Ground is ready for construction. Let's use it. Let's save the money on site preparation and site restoration. We are in this position because ASD chose to put the new school, their proposed rebuild, on the south end of the property during the time of COVID. The choice was made so that students could stay in the old school during construction. COVID is over. No longer a valid criteria. As a consequence, I believe that ASD has not done a rigorous cost analysis of rebuilding on the existing developed ground. Do the analysis, please do that analysis. If you can save $10 or $15 million and get the school that you want, then you can have a lot of money to share with a lot of other schools and a lot of other programs who would be very grateful and deserve their support, your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fields, Representative Fields, followed by Lois Epstein. Sorry. Welcome, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Chair Bellamy and members of the board. Zach Fields. I live in South Addition, and Inlet View is the largest elementary school zone in my district. I do support the board moving forward with 151S capital funding for Inlet View, Ursa Major, Stellar Secondary, West High, and numerous other roof projects across the district. As the school district plans to address a mix of large and small capital projects with a combination of small annual bonds and state appropriations, we have to think about getting these projects done across the district. If our annual bonds are approximately $38 million, we should be using state funds to address larger projects. And that's what the substitute action item before you does, specifically rebuilding both Ursa Major and Inlet View. We need to be prepared to address the next large items on our CIP as well, Bartlett, Lake Otis, East, and Romig, all of which will need large capital investment. The capital project package that you're considering, the substitute version, primarily uses funds appropriated by the state that we appropriated last year. Those of us who are influential in the budget process specifically intended that you fund projects, including Inlet View and all the other projects on the bond that had previously failed, The bond failed largely because we as a state had not met our obligation under fulfilling state bond, school bond debt reimbursement and adequate major maintenance funding. Fortunately, we restored that lost funding last year. And if you move forward with the S version, you will be fulfilling the legislative intent of people who shaped and voted for and passed that budget. We should be committed to neighborhood schools across the city, whether in East Anchorage, South Anchorage, or North Anchorage. And when we have thriving neighborhood schools, in order to provide thriving neighborhood schools, we have to have buildings that are safe and functional. I've never heard a functional classroom referred to as an anchor around our students' neck before the prior anti-inlet view testimony. I'm actually sick and tired of the malicious misinformation campaign by a tiny handful of NIMBYs who don't want a school building closer to their house after they bought a house next to Inlet View. Their false claims about drainage, earthquakes, remodel have been disproven over and over. How many times do they have to be disproven before we simply provide students in a neighborhood school with a safe learning environment? You're going to face major capital projects in every corner of the city. And I would say, is there any school that should be held up or closed because 4 people nearby don't like it? There's not a single school in our city where we should allow a vicious group of NIMBYs to shut down that school. The South Addition Community Council has weighed in repeatedly on the school. The overwhelming majority of people in my district have voted for it, and they've elected me after championing this school relentlessly. I urge you to move forward consistent with the legislative intent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Lois. Hey, there she is. Welcome. You have 3 minutes, followed by Sharon Meacham.
I believe Sharon's ill.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Lois Epstein. I'm a licensed civil engineer with my own consulting business. I live near but not adjacent to Inlet View, so I do not qualify as a NIMBY. I strongly oppose spending far too much of the district's money on a school rebuild, as in 151S, when there is a very viable and much cheaper option, a school remodel. The latter would result in a nearly new school without foundational, structural, and water issues, more light for the school and the community that uses the grounds, and would not worsen neighborhood traffic. Those who have raised questions about the proposed school rebuild, like myself, have been bullied by our House member and told to keep quiet. We have raised technical objections to the project's proposed site, which would increase costs, but we were told not to worry without ever receiving the technical documentation we requested. An opinion piece in the ADN the other day, signed by Representative Fields, Jake Metcalf, and multiple others who are affiliated with Inlet View, inaccurately states that an Inlet View remodel is more expensive than a rebuild. A remodel actually is 10 to 15 million cheaper, as the school board knows from previous presentations by ASD staff. The 150 plus community members who support Inlet View remodel have been ignored from the start by the school district, by the school board, except for board member Donnelly, and by Superintendent Bryant. We were not told about the school's planning meetings, a violation of the State Open Records Act. Only community members with connections to students in the school were invited. When neighbors adjacent to the school raised concerns about the rebuild design in fall 2021, ASD and its consultant informed them that it was too late to change the design. When Inlet View neighbors asked to meet with the superintendent, they were denied. This is not how ASD's decisions to spend tens of millions of dollars are supposed to occur. Today's plan to shoehorn the controversial $26 million for Inlet View above and beyond the non-controversial $19 million for capital projects is appalling. Inlet View would receive nearly 3 times the amount of the second highest school, Ursa Major. The ongoing refusal of ASD to answer our reasonable technical questions is unconscionable. The proposed Inlet View rebuild, a 2-story design like a mini high school promoted by former Superintendent Bishop, has moved forward only by ignoring many of its closest residents. ASD is not a good neighbor. For those of us who support public education, and I include myself, and who love this neighborhood school, we feel betrayed. And for those throughout Anchorage whose schools may soon be closed or whose children may lose treasured extracurricular or enrichment programs, the $26 million decision will be highly damaging. Please do not vote to spend $26 million in 151S to rebuild Inlet View and vote instead to develop a remodel plan. Please make this decision on merit, not surrendering to the loudest voices. For those on the school board who are up for election in 2024 and 2025, know that we won't forget your vote today. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide input into this important decision.
Thank you very much. Let's go next 2 speakers, Kurt Egelhofer. And I'm going to ask you to repeat your name. And then Mitch Cullum. Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kurt Egelhofer. I live on 14th Avenue, about 2 blocks west of Inlet View. And I've talked to about a dozen people on my street, and they all support the new construction of Inlet View. So I am in support of ASD Memo 151S in general, and in the construction of Inlet View in particular. The student population exceeds capacity. There's no sprinkler system, and there are security concerns at this school. It's 64 years old. I'm 68, and I'm about ready to be replaced. And I think it's time the school does too. I'm a retired engineer. My daughter graduated from O'Malley and West High, so she did not go to Inlet View, but she graduated in 2011, and 9 years later, she obtained her PhD in chemistry. So she had an excellent education at the school district. I like the design. I think the building has been relocated 20 feet north from the original proposal to give it a little more space from the neighbors. I like the vehicular access from Inlet Place on the east side. I think it's a good design. And so do the people that I've talked to along 14th Avenue. So I urge you to vote for 151S and Inlet View. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mitch Cullum, followed by Michael Schnechter. And I'm going to ask you to repeat your name when you get up here. Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mitchell Cullum. I am a former ASD student, father of a future student, husband to an ASD teacher, and a South Addition Community Council member that served on the Building Design Committee for the Inlet View project. I am here tonight to urge board members to oppose the amendment partially funding the new construction replacement for Inlet View Elementary. Over the last 2 years, there have been many indications that a course correction was needed for this project, but unfortunately, no correction was made. The ignored signs have ranged from neighborhood opposition to building on the opposite end of the lot that was contrary to the original ASD plan, to the failed Urban Design Commission approval, and of course, let's not forget the failed ASD 2022 bond. I'm not going to recap all of the suboptimal aspects of the currently advanced design, but there are many. If you move forward with funding the currently advanced plan, it will cost Anchorage taxpayers $10 to $15 million more than a major remodel would cost. Anchorage municipal property tax bills landed in mailboxes yesterday. The ASD portion was the largest line item and accounted for 42% of the tax. Anchorage residents expect you to spend wisely with their money and will let you know when you don't, as you found out with the April 2022 ASD bond. ASD has hundreds of millions of dollars in deferred maintenance and is struggling with hiring and retaining teachers. I hope that the board gets its priorities straight this evening and doesn't waste $10 to $15 million to appease a few politicians and pander to some vocal, wealthy parents that don't want to temporarily relocate during construction. The solution for Inlet View Elementary isn't to try and pull off some backdoor funding with an amendment to a memorandum without proper public notice, but rather make needed course corrections and listen to the will of the voters and move forward with a remodel. ASD's core value states the district will be open, transparent, and accountable to the public. Taking actions that subvert the will of the voters doesn't demonstrate accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome. You have 3 minutes. Please state your name.
Good evening. My name is Michael Schechter. I am the parent of 2 soon-to-be Inlet View orcas this fall. We have twins. I would like to first start by saying I'd like to co-sign the comments of Ms. Wilm and Representative Fields. They spoke with more knowledge, history, experience, and eloquence than I could have on the areas that they addressed. I'd like to say that it's a privilege to speak before you tonight, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. I have the time and the wherewithal and the flexibility and the means to be here with my wife and have a babysitter and speak. And my comments tonight are about the Inlet View and the community and the diverse community, diverse in many senses of the word that it serves. And I say this understanding the privilege that I have, which is my kids will be fine whatever you do. They'll be fine. My kids will be fine. The kids at Inlet View, not all of them will be fine, depending on the decision you make. The decision you make may force them to be in a school that has some unknown failure while we try to figure out what else to do if we don't go forward with building a new school. They may be bust somewhere else. You may break up a high functioning school. To what end? To make a couple of neighbors feel a little bit better about what's going on around them. I will speak about what I do know. I have been a practicing land use attorney for about 19 years. I know about big projects. I know about NIMBYs, or at least I thought I did. There are typically two types of project opponents. Someone who has some real concerns and would like to see some improvements in project design. Then the other is, people who really don't want the project will throw in a mix of things that seem like real concerns, things that people think can be fixed or will improve the project design. And the two quickly separate themselves out because the second one, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, and no matter when you say it, it's never enough. And I think you're seeing that happen here. But there's actually a third type, which I didn't really understand. And that's someone who, if they don't get their way, is willing to burn it all to the ground. And we've seen in here tonight the height of callousness, cynicism, and hypocrisy, where members of our community who went out and campaigned against the school bond and helped cause it to fail came in here and are now crying crocodile tears about why can't we share money with the rest of the school district? And we should not kowtow to folks who are willing to hold our children hostage and to burn it all down because they're not getting their way about the way a school is designed. I urge you to adopt Memo 151S, and thank you all for your hard service in these difficult choices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to the phone, Ms. Celeste Groudon.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. You have 3 minutes.
All right, great. Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Bryant, President Bellamy, and members of the Anchorage School Board. My name is Celeste Hodge Groudon, and I'm the President and CEO of the Alaska Black Caucus. I am testifying tonight. Originally, I'm so, I called to testify in support of ASD Memorandum 151, the substitute version, and I'm listening to all of the comments from folks that are calling in, and now I'm torn. I do want to share, though, that there have been comments about individuals bullying folks, and I want to say that I received some threats myself from representatives, and I won't say any names, but they know who they are, because I felt one way and that individual felt another way. So I want to also share that I don't take kindly to threats. As elected officials who are charged with representing our entire municipality, I trust that equity is at the forefront of your mind when you allocate the limited resources at your disposal due to years of flat funding from our legislature and a temporary halt to state of Alaska school bond debt reimbursement. Last fall, I testified in staunch opposition of a memorandum which would allocate roughly $37 million in funding for one singular project, while other schools in Anchorage were left untouched. Thankfully, that well-intended but misguided proposal was postponed with a promise to revisit the discussion at a later date. And so here we are. I join you again tonight with a simple message, and I do want to thank you for listening to our community school board members, and thank you for deliberating on a better path forward for all students. And that's where I'm at. I want to see funding allocated to all students, to all the schools that need, whether it's being remodeled or some type of modification. And I have a hard time seeing the money just go to one or two schools when I know that there's assistance that's needed on the east side when I look at Mountain View Elementary or Clark or some of those schools. So thank you for coming back to the table with a proposal, though, that impacts thousands of ASD families and will improve learning environments across Anchorage. By my count, the school board is now considering using the same pool of funds to improve not just one school.
Thank you very much. Your time is up. Let's move on. In person, we have Kate Vogel. Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kate Vogel, and I thank you for your time today. I urge a yes vote on all of the proposed capital appropriations in the S version of Memo 151. I'm going to be an Inlet View parent starting this fall and urge that your support include the Inlet View rebuild. This board has postponed the issue of Inlet View funding in the past, but the needs of this successful and diverse neighborhood school are not going to go away by continuing to ignore it. We can all hear the entrenched voices. For that reason, I urge the board to take action today. It is time for all of these capital appropriations to be approved. And I would just urge that the parents of Anchorage are watching what happens and in a successful school where there's a community that is invested, where there've been the studies, the process, and it's clear what the parents and the school community want. How does the school board respond? And that is an issue that goes beyond Inlet View and speaks to Anchorage's commitment to our school system. For that reason, I urge that you support all of the S version of 151, and I thank you again for your time.
And thank you very much. We'll go back to the phones. Elise Huggins. Do you see her? Maybe that's her. That's her. Elise Huggins. I don't see her, so I'll come back, maybe because I don't know that number. Okay, we'll try to come back to her. Patricia O'Gorman and Amanda Compton. Patricia O'Gorman, come forward, please. Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Patricia O'Gorman. I've lived in the Inlet View neighborhood for more than 40 years. I'm a parent of a former Inlet View student, and I'm the former school nurse at Inlet View. I've written and testified a number of times in support of funding a new school for Inlet View community. I recently sent a letter about 4 or 5 days ago outlining some detail, and I'm not going to go back into that. I am here asking that you approve the funds available in 151S for this school. The one thing I do want to add and bring to the board's attention is that it's my opinion that several people speaking against this project do not have an educational or community interest in Inlet View School. Some do not even live in the neighborhood. Some have never been a parent or a student at Inlet View. I think those things are important to keep in mind. I don't envy you, you're making a decision, but I think there's a lot of the questions about the design process have been answered. It would take a lot of time on your part going back and reviewing those, but many of the concerns, not all, have been addressed. Thank you for your time.
And thank you very much. Amanda Compton. She should be online. I don't see her. Nope. No, okay, let's move on. Hannah Brewster. Welcome. Hannah is here. And Michael Carson, no, I'm sorry, hold on. But you come, Hannah. And then you will be followed by Moira Smith. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Hannah Brewster. Good evening. Thank you for your time and service to the students of Anchorage. I'm here tonight to urge you to move forward with the capital improvement package before you in Memorandum 151S. Maintaining buildings in a timely manner is of the utmost importance, and the district has the capital funding available now to do so. Failure to fund these projects will only add to their costs at a later date and leave students and staff learning and working in failing buildings. I'm the parent of a rising first grader at Inlet View with a second child who will start school next year and the co-president of the PTA. Major repairs and deficiencies at Inlet View have gone unaddressed for many years. Students and staff are still showing up to a building that doesn't meet ASD standards for learning environments. We've failed the Inlet View community with a failure to act, and I would hate for the other schools included in this package to suffer the same fate. Roofs won't fix themselves. Secure entries do not materialize. They cost money, and it is your responsibility to allocate that money where it is needed to keep our students learning in safe environments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Maura is there. Maura Smith, you have 3 minutes. *6 to unmute.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Moira. Hi, my name is Moira Smith, and I'm testifying tonight in my personal capacity. Thank you to each of the board members for your service. I am here to echo the comments of so many folks this evening and to urge the school board to approve Memorandum 151S. I in particular want to echo the comments of Ms. Hodge-Grouden and the appreciation she expressed for the board coming back to the table to assemble a thoughtful package of capital improvements. I am the parent of an Inlet View student and am involved in that community, but I've sent children of mine, stepchildren and children of mine to 4 other schools. I myself attended a different school and my grandma taught at Rabbit Creek Elementary. So I've been around the Anchorage School District for some time. It gave me great joy to see the memorandum that had Stellar Secondary, West High, Bear Valley, Fire Lake, Spring Hill, Clatt, Scenic Park, Bayshore, Creekside Park, Ursa Major, and Inlet View, and Ravenwood Elementary, all included. Now, I also serve on the executive committee of the South Addition Community Council, and I want to remind you that on November 17th, 2022, that community council once again overwhelmingly voted in favor of a resolution supporting the replacement of Inlet View using one-time school bond debt reimbursement funds. The president of the South Addition Community Council emailed it to this body on Friday, November 18th. As a final point, and one that goes to good governance, I would strongly urge the board to reconstitute the Capital Investment Advisory Committee. As the school district and as you as its governing body face extraordinarily difficult capital allocation decisions, I urge the board to rely on a broader swath of Anchorage citizens to serve as advisors and advocates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go back to Amanda Compton. Amanda, *6 to unmute. And you have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name's Amanda Compton. I own a house adjacent to the Inlet View property. The school needs to be replaced yesterday, and we need to be making decisions for tomorrow. And current trends suggest prudency, lest we end up closing schools and stripping down programs. I'm here tonight to make the case not to fund the high dollar item of a new school in the dark and wet part of the property and to instead fully remodel the Inlet View School at its current location. According to a recent opinion piece by Elise Huggins, the school is the only remaining public building that's an example of the mid-century modern style of architecture in Anchorage, and it's eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. A full remodel could address the aging infrastructure issues and also preserve this piece of local history. I've listened to people hurl insults at those in opposition the full last year. I've listened to how exhausting the efforts were of those in support of this project, but that's an oversight. Nowhere on that list was public engagement. All the other stakeholders were listed except the people who live in the area. So those old people with so much time on their hands, they read their email, they read the paper, they read the whole paper, and they go to meetings. They have time to stay informed, but there was nothing to inform them about. That millions have been spent already doesn't mean we're at fault. It means the cart went before the horse. Endorsing the relocation endorses clandestine city planning. That will always bring dissent. Perhaps more importantly, to some at least, the 10 to 15 million the remodel alternative would save could potentially be applied to reduce class sizes in other struggling schools and preserve some extracurricular activities that might get the axe. We're in an educational budget crisis. So why are we considering the model of you get a new school, but your school is closing? Thank you.
And thank you very much. I think we have one more, Kevin, on this topic. Kevin McCoy, welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to offer my thoughts on 151. My name is Kevin McCoy, and I've lived 1 block from Inlet View for the last 33 years. It's my neighborhood, and I'm here to testify in support of 151S. I urge you in the strongest possible terms to adopt it as proposed. It's frustrating to sit here listening to the folks that oppose this. I know their feelings are heartfelt, but they're misguided. You would think that there was no public process before this. You would think that these arguments were never made before. You would think that all of the reasons that they have against the school being rebuilt have just been ignored. And that's simply not true. And I'm frustrated by that. The Inlet View students need a new school. We all know the existing structure is outdated. It's structurally unsound. And as time goes on, it's getting increasingly safe. I think failure to go forward with the process now would be fiscally irresponsible. You're just going to delay the inevitable, and it's going to cost so much more money. And that's why I think some of the speakers, who I wish I was as eloquent as they were, are urging you to act tonight. I think it's important to do that. I've lived in Alaska for 44 years. I have 3 children. They're all adults. They're a product of the Anchorage School District. And I'd like to take all of the credit, but I can't. It's what they received from the Anchorage School District that launched them on their successful lives. And I want that for my grandchildren, and I want it for their children and their children's children. And that's why it's important for you to act now. So for all of those reasons, I would urge you in the strongest terms to adopt 151S. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that ends our speakers signed up to speak on memo number 151. Okay, so we are back to, is there a interest in taking a 5-minute break? Let's do a 5-minute break. We'll be back just before 8. Yeah. I'd like to welcome everyone back. Let's see, we are missing Member Holloman. All right, so the motion before us is to approve memorandum number 151S. It's been moved in second. So discussion. All right, we're now in, what is the board, the
Yep.
will of the board?
Well, I'd like to discuss, if I might, Madam President, as the maker of the motion.
Member Jacobs.
Thank you. So just to circle back to the beginning, we are having a second half of a conversation that really started last fall. And so I'll begin there. On October 4th, 2022, after intentional delay to allow for additional public discourse in and outside of this room, the school board passed a landmark memorandum which allocated nearly $50 million in school bond debt reimbursement funds granted by the Alaska legislature in a new effort to begin seriously tackling our deferred maintenance backlog. The board members will recall that the memorandum included security vestibule projects at 7 elementary schools to keep students safe, urgent meat and potato, capital project investments like boiler repairs, camera upgrades, roof restorations, as well as funding to mitigate our growing backlog of recurring minor maintenance projects submitted by our teachers and administrators, some of which bog down our amazing team of building trade professionals from tackling other important work that keeps our school buildings running efficiently. We receive pictures of leaking roofs in schools and other significant problems that funding attacked. The funding allocation represented significant value and savings to the Anchorage taxpayers as they projects were not just pulled from list of future school bond propositions, but for the first time, this board aggressively funded projects which pursued repair and life extension maintenance work over replacement, which saved taxpayers millions of dollars in the process. The last item during our discussion this past fall was a promise that we would return at a later date to allocate the remaining $37 million in school bond debt reimbursement with an eye towards addressing other large projects, and a motion that was adopted by a majority of this board, which included, but were not necessarily limited to, the newly discovered damage at Ursa Major Elementary on Jaybear and the long discussed rebuild of Inlet View Elementary in downtown Anchorage. On December 19th, the board passed ASD Memorandum number 0024S and 094, which affirmed a desire to use the remaining school bond debt reimbursement for capital project needs as the 32nd legislature intended. It was specifically restated the board would revisit the topic of funding allocation after adoption of the FY24 budget, which gets us to this evening. The memo before us tonight allocates the remaining school bond debt reimbursement funds given to us by the legislature to address capital needs, but with notable improvements. The last motion in front of us regarding these funds were allocated to one building, and it was a conversation that I thought needed more time personally, and that's why we're here tonight. The memorandum that we're discussing and may potentially vote on is a significant improvement in my eyes, as it addresses a dozen projects from South Anchorage out to Eagle River. Between the memo that we're passing tonight, as well as the funding that was appropriated on October 4th, we moreover have addressed our capital needs in every legislative district in the municipality of Anchorage. Even in this memo tonight, as currently constituted, 20 of the 24 Anchorage legislative districts are encompassed in this memorandum. So we're tackling projects from across Anchorage. If you incorporate the funding and projects on our 2023 school bond proposition, which passed, we catch those other 4 up. And so in my district in East Anchorage, Anchorage, we're seeing a project that's incorporated. I know that we are addressing projects in South Anchorage. We're focusing on things like roof replacements, which yield a significant roof repairs, which yield a significant savings versus a full replacement. And I think we need to continue to focus on projects which bring value to taxpayers when we're allocating these capital dollars. Transitioning to some of the debate that we've heard, I think something to keep in mind is this board was briefed, and I went back and scoured YouTube to rewatch the presentations on the debate of replacing versus repairing Inlet View Elementary. And I didn't think that I was misremembering, but ASD administration recommended and indicated that the value to the taxpayer was best with a rebuild, because while the initial investment for a renovation was at first lower, there were additional 10 to 15 million in costs over the first 2 decades of operating that renovated building, which wouldn't exist with a new building. And so if we're going to be good stewards of resources and address problems that have been neglected for decades and continue to do so, as we did in October, it may take significant capital investment, but I think that we've heard loud and clear from the community, and we're being responsive in that. Our vision for Anchorage is not simply to shutter the first 10 schools which are in dire need of repair. That is something that the board could certainly consider if there are members who would like to do that, is because Ursa Major on base had a significant damage from the recent earthquake, that building could be considered for closure, and that could be the end of the conversation. I think we owe it to our community to have a deeper conversation and evaluate what we view strategically makes sense in terms of locations as a board and in concert with administration. I think this memorandum does that. The other item I'll address, which was discussed at our last meeting potentially and since, is the 2022 bond proposition, which narrowly failed by 1.5 percentage points or so. In looking back at the survey data that this board received, it was striking to note that the largest indicator that we've addressed since was actually roughly 1 in 5 respondents felt that a biannual school bond was something that they wouldn't consider due to the size of the bond. I went back and thought through our amendment process in terms of public notice for that night, and was disappointed that I wasn't more experienced at the time, with it being my first bond cycle, to catch that we inflated the cost of the 2022 bond by roughly 15 million without any public notice, without public process or debate or consideration with our constituents, and we certainly could do better. And I think the data bears out the fact that both a large bond that we attempted to pass, which was still frankly below what we need to adopt on an annual basis to keep up with our deferred maintenance backlog, isn't sustainable. And so we've since transitioned to smaller annual bonds, at least until school bond debt reimbursement, then that moratorium ends. I think we have a path forward which best serves all students, and this is an extension of that. I think this is a memorandum which addresses a number of different projects and impacts positively thousands of families in our district, and sets a tone for how we need to continue to be more proactive so projects don't sit for decades without sufficient attention, and we aren't constantly looking at a replacement conversation, whether it be from a boiler, a roof, or a building, and instead start being proactive with repair and similar types of conversations. And so I'll start there, Madam President. Those are my thoughts, and thank you for the time and the grace.
Thank you very much. Other comments? Member Higgins? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll come back to Member Donnelly. Go on. We'll go back to Member Higgins. I think I did see your light first. Member Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm concerned with spending very limited funds that we have on what is arguably very important projects, but at the same time, not immediately needed projects when we're facing a massive projection deficit for the school year for 24-25. is just not a prudent action and prudent use of the money that we have, this one-time money, this one-time moment in time. I'm very concerned that in the upcoming school year, we've already seen the feedback on this from the community. The board voted to increase class sizes. I campaigned against that. I said I wouldn't vote for it. I voted against it. This is putting us on the road, if this passes, towards future class size increases again, and potential loss of very important programs, educational, valuable programs to this community. Last time we were faced with a deficit dramatically less than what we're faced with this in the next budget cycle, and we still had to increase, there was still the requirement to increase class sizes to come up with the balance that the majority of the board agreed on. So I'm very concerned that we're going to hear from parents about increased class sizes and the loss of educational programs because of this vote that may spend this money right now. This project, the design money for this project should have never been mixed in with the earthquake repair money on the bond, with the $3 million that was approved on that bond. At the time, I argued that it should be broken out and voted on separate. I think that the community, 90% of the community was supporting what needed to be done with the earthquake bonds. Those repairs absolutely essential. And it was really a mistake and unfair to the community to include that $3 million mixed in with earthquake bonds that we all supported and knew had to happen. There was a lot of opposition to this course of action at that time. And by lumping those two things together, it put us on the road to this moment right now.
What is your point?
I'm all for Member Donnelly, again, discussing things that happened with the prior board, but I think we need to clarify that this was before this board's time. And this speaks to nothing that has to do with the allocation that we're discussing in 151. So I think we need to
Member Donnelly,
discussions
please.
should be
We
germane.
gave you an opportunity to speak. Let him state his point of order.
So I'm just asking that the conversation be germane and clarify when we're talking about decisions that the board's making, that it's this board. And so that, which again speaks to germaneness. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If the point of order is germaneness, this responds to something that was actually in public testimony. The public testimony was that we've already spent $3 million.
Member Donnelly, you can speak to me. Just can you direct your comments to me?
So may I may not talk to the point that was raised in public testimony.
I didn't say you couldn't talk to it,
Right.
but I think the point is to make your for this, the work of this board and this motion before us, if we can try to at least focus on that.
I don't have to do that, Madam President. This board is an ongoing body. The decisions this board made 20 years ago are relevant to our students today.
And that is a good point,
Precluded from
except none of us were
discussing
there.
public
A lot of us
policy
were not
matters.
there and we do not.
Well, I'm
and
not
we-
accusing anybody here of making
Okay.
that decision. I didn't
So
say
let's,
that.
can we get
I
back
said
to
the
your
board
point?
did it, and the board did in fact do that at this time, and I was here and I voted against doing it at that
Okay.
time.
Is there anything else for this tonight's memo?
Yes.
Okay.
Prior to the ASD changing how they measured the capacity of our schools, Inlet View was not overcrowded. But at some point in time, right before I got on this board, that measurement was changed by the administration at that time. That caused Inlet View to be measured as overcrowded. That is exacerbated by the fact that there's 50 to 60 of our students coming from other parts of the community going to Inlet View School. Now, I think it's wonderful they get the opportunity to do that. It may be super convenient for those parents. At the same time, it has created a calculation that the school's overcrowded, where if it wasn't for the change in how we measured the calculation, and it wasn't for the school district allowing all those students from other parts of town to go there, it wouldn't be classified today as overcrowded. Additionally, numerous elementary schools around Inlet View are down to about 70% or have capacity available to them to absorb any overcrowding that's currently or even calculated under, even with those two factors in the current situation.
Be that as it may, I've always supported a major remodel for Inlet View, just like we did for Turnagain very successfully, and I continue to support that. Building a new school will cost between $10 and $15 million more than doing the remodel. That might be even higher based on what the most recent estimates for building the full new tearing down and building the new school are. I've heard reports, and I'm hoping we'll have testimony tonight from the administration saying that there are new increased costs projected for the different site that it would be built on. We heard tonight that something got moved by 20 feet in public testimony, and costs are going up. So it might be higher than that. We haven't had a definitive number yet. And what this does is puts the taxpayers on the hook, once again, for unknown dollar amount, if that dollar amount goes up before the next bond, because it's going to have to be on the next bond, the balance of this. So it's somewhere over $10 million, and it could be quite a bit more than that that's going to show up on the next bond. And once again, the taxpayers are going to be faced with a very difficult proposition. Do they go along with this reduced amount, which is going to obligate this huge amount of money, or do they say no to a whole list of really needy smaller projects? And that's not fair to taxpayers. It ought to be broke off separate at the time when we do the next bond at the very minimum, and I anticipate it will not. This money is 100% fungible, can be used for any legitimate need of the school district. There was nothing in writing from the legislature that said this money was for capital. And believe me, in my 16 years in the legislature, I know that when the legislature wanted something to be used that way, they would write that into the appropriation. There wasn't even intent language adopted by the legislature that said this was supposed to be used for capital. So that argument is just specious. That we're supposed to be doing what the legislature's intent was here. That is not legally binding. Everybody knows that even intent language is questionable about being legally binding. It should be in the appropriation language itself. I mentioned I'm very concerned about class sizes in the coming future, and that this money being available to us as a shock absorber to help fill in the projected gap we're going to be facing is going to be very, very valuable about 1 year from now, or less than 1 year from now, when we're faced with that. Even if the maximum amount that was appropriated by the legislature this year comes through as far as funding for one-time funding for school districts, it's not going to close our gap. Our gap is still going to be very significant. And we all know it's going to be more than it was last year. And last year caused the board to take action to increase class sizes. That's very concerning. It's also very difficult to explain to voters why we're doing something they voted against. And the member looked at the survey. I also looked at the survey, and I saw that one of the factors in the survey was identified was the difference in the bond failing was the people who identified that voted against it because of the Inlet View project being a new school, building a new school. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's 2 more new schools on the 6-year capital plan. This is just the first one this community is facing this decision on. And all this time, not all this time, but last year, we were faced with a proposal from the administration to close down 6 neighborhood schools. Is very hard. It's impossible for me to justify building a new school when we're telling other neighborhoods they have to potentially lose their neighborhood schools, because those are so vital to those communities. I don't think Inlet View should lose their school. Even, I think it should be brought up to code and done a major remodel there, but I don't want to do Inlet View at the expense of other communities losing their schools. And we heard that testimony over and over and over again from the public during the public hearings we held on the closure of the 6 schools at those schools. People were upset that they would lose their neighborhood elementary school if the board was going to build a new school someplace else. And just a few months ago, we heard from the administration that this next budget cycle, we might see as many as 10 elementary schools put up for potential closure. That's been a few months ago that was said. I don't know if that's still the plan, but we were told that at this time. So at a time where we're looking at potential proposals from the administration to close down 10 of our elementary schools, we're going forward with spending incredibly rare and valuable one-time funds that could be used as an alternative to closing down schools to build a brand new school rather than do a remodel for school when remodels have been proven very successful. Economically, if we had unlimited funds, yes, building a new school would be more efficient and save money over 50 years. But we don't have unlimited resources in this district. We have very limited resources, and these one-time funds are just that, one-time funds. And we're very lucky to have them as potential shock absorber to the huge gap that we're faced with, not for this coming school year, but for the one after that. And that's very concerning to use them all up at once at this time. Those are just a few of my thoughts on this, Madam President.
Thank you, Member Donnelly. Member Higgins.
Thank you. Actually, I like the disagreement. I think you benefit when you have a decision in which you have different points of view and everybody's sharing it and everybody feels free to do so. And so that doesn't upset me. I kind of like it, as a matter of fact. You get to listen, and both sides have some merit. Okay, I'll be honest with you. There's merit to both sides, and I don't think we can dispute that. Just from a history standpoint, I mean, a lot of the bonds issue, the 90s when they did the BSA, the state committed that they knew they didn't give us money for capital projects, and they were going to commit to providing additional funds with matching our bonds, and they've reneged on that. Just like they've for 5 years not giving an increase in the BSA, and now when they do, they make it a one-time contribution. So a lot of these issues go beyond just this one case in front of us. Disagreement about the site location doesn't influence me either way, because that's not focused on kids. And that's not the board's decision at this point in time where the site's going to be. We're focused on what's best for kids and what's best for students. And that should be the focus of that within it. And that's what I'm trying to focus on right now, what's best for kids. I think Inlet View is part of the Anchorage School District and will be longer term. We will be looking at reducing schools, but there's reasons from an academic standpoint why consolidating some schools larger and making some changes are beneficial. And with the sixth graders moving, that's going to make it possible so that some elementary schools have greater diversity in programs. A number of issues that are out there that I've heard arguments both sides. So I'm not a supporter of cutting back on neighborhood schools. Abbott Loop got eliminated, and that was a vote that the board voted, but it was 6-1. So I'm not a big fan of that. I like the neighborhood schools. In this particular case, the remodel versus the new, or how we're going to do it, is the issue. I remember last board meeting, Ursa Major, when the military was here and said they did a review, and because the cost was so great, it makes more sense to rebuild. You know, if you wreck a car, it doesn't have to be fully totaled with the full amount of it. They reach a point where they say it's not smart to rebuild or to remodel when it's too great. There's going to be other issues coming up, and you're going to have maintenance after that. And at some point there, you say, this isn't the best investment of your money. It's wise management on the dollars. And I think we're dealing with that size project right now with the just extent of what needs to be done at Inlet View. Trying to do this with a remodel is it's not the best financial investment that you can do. And then the question comes down, what's best for kids? I think keeping Inlet View moving and forward going is important. I think it affects kids. I think it affects academics, and all the other issues aside, that should be the primary issue. What's best for kids? Everything we're doing should be secondhand to that. But then we do it in the best financial management way we can. So from my standpoint, Inlet View is a part of us getting better academic outcomes. It's better for the kids. I think dismissing it on the part of the bond that went through The safety provisions in the bond didn't fail because people didn't want it. You can blame Inlet View, you can blame all of it in a very close vote, but you got people saying, I don't want to go in bonding. You got people that don't want any more taxes. You got 100 reasons out there, and drawing a conclusion on a very close bond election and saying that they reject, they don't want this type of improvement. They don't want the safety vestiges for the schools, or they don't want this. I think that's an unfair assessment of what took place. I think we didn't do a good job of selling the bonds. And that was an issue. I don't think we did that. And I've heard that from a lot of sources, but selling it or not, we didn't do a good job of educating. I don't want to sell it. I want to educate. There's a difference. You sell it, you give one side speech, you educate, you discuss both sides and the advantages and disadvantages. I believe this is best for kids. Okay. And I think it's best for kids that we keep Inlet View. I think it's unfair not to ignore that this school isn't in the condition it needs to be a public school right now. It is in serious problems. In doing it on a half basis is not going to save us money and improve education results the way it could if we went over all the distance and went with it. So I'm voting for kids, in my opinion. So I am voting for the 151S. I think that is, I think everything else is secondary to me. If it's not for kids, then I've lost sight of what we're here for. And I think this is best for kids. And that's why I'm going to vote support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Higgins. Member Wilson.
Capital needs, when not addressed, inevitably become more expensive. That's just inevitable. With this memo, and I'll just reiterate, I know what has already been said, but 20 of the 24 districts have projects being addressed. Roof repairs and roof replacement will be addressed. Safety and security continues to be a focus. And the rebuild of 2 new schools is also addressed on this memo. And I, as Member Higgins stated, I heard loud and clear when it was stated that Department of Defense believes that a rebuild is more efficient. We have the opportunity to address many capital needs around the district, and we'll keep and also what's important to me is we'll keep the next school bond at a similar size than our 2023 bond that the community did pass. They did support. So I am in support of memo 151S and will be voting in support of it.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Member Holloman.
It is sad to me that this has caused the level of division that it has, especially within a community. And certainly people are always going to have disagreements about it. But it does seem that it's gotten personal for a lot of people. And I think that's very unfortunate as we sit at a point where we're trying to decide what's best for the city, best for students going forward. I think people showing up are sincere. They feel the things they feel. And it is very complicated. It is something that's gone on for some time. Reiterating what Member Wilson said, of course, a remodel is cheaper, but early on, it was also advanced that in the long run, a rebuild was cheaper. Obviously, the remodel has a lower price tag, but the building is not going to sustain for the same number of years without major repair as a new building is. And I say that having had the fortune of working in a new building in ASD, the new buildings are not like the old buildings at all. They are built very different, and they're built in a way. I got to work in the new Golden View Middle School. And one of the remarkable things about Golden View is when people walk into it now, they go, wow, it must be nice to be in a new school. And that's a new school that's 20 some years old. And that it's because of the way they build and the materials they use and everything. We just do a much better job. I do think that Anchorage is in a financial pinch, and the state's in a financial pinch for a little while. although we're in a pinch and we have a marvelous sum of oil revenue and we've got a savings account that is the envy of everybody I know. So we're not really poor, but we are, the way we have our hands on each other, it makes it seem that way. As a member of the board and being entrusted to weigh in on this decision, I feel like we have to look at the long term, or that we should look at the long term, unless the finances of the city and the state really were dire. And I don't think you can really call it that. They might appear to be dire because of a lack of political courage by some leaders, or because of people wanting to focus money in one particular area as opposed to others. But the reality is we are the happiest people in dire circumstances I know of in terms of all the money that we have to spend. That makes me want to say we should take the long view of what's going to benefit Anchorage and our students, because we can, and that would be a new building built to modern standards completely. And so that's part of it. I do want to say, and I almost hesitate to say it because I think this will be easy for folks to misinterpret if they want to. The vote on the bond issue is about whether or not we're allowed to borrow money in your name. It's not actually about the projects. And I'd ask people to realize that, like, if we're talking about a boiler and the boiler's on the bond and that bond package fails, it doesn't mean that we can just keep using that boiler for another decade or so. We still have to find a way to deal with it because it was identified as something that's ready to go and needs to be replaced. We may not be allowed to bond, and that's the case with what we brought forward. It was voted down. Doesn't make Inlet View building any better or function any better or be in better shape. We still have to find a way to do that. And this isn't the most conventional way. I'll also say that the bond vote was complicated. It was a large bond, and I'll admit I was one of the people that voted to make it larger in the face of some people that said they didn't think it would pass. A number of things happened between the time we made that vote and the time citizens voted, including a community work agreement. And personally, I had more people tell me they were voting no on the bond because of that than any other single reason. It bothered a section of the community greatly. You could just as easily say that people didn't want the security entrances for our elementary schools, but I don't think that's necessarily true. And I'm sure there were people that voted no on the bond because they didn't want a new Inlet View school. And I understand that, but I don't think you can really just look at any one thing and say, this is what the voters said on this bond issue. We as a board still have to think about what we think is the best way for the district to go forward. And of course, look at the results of that bond issue, and it will be coming back again for another vote, but in a more favorable amount, and hopefully something that people are in a more positive frame of mind about at the time. The other part is, it is very hard to say to some people, we're thinking about closing your school, but we're going to completely rebuild another. And to some degree, it doesn't make a lot of sense, except when you understand the intricacies of the funding of schools and in Alaska and the interplay of funds between the state and the city and whatnot. I will tell you, almost none of that makes sense. From a logical point of view, if you look at how we fund things and the timing of when budgets are decided versus we have to build our budget before we have any idea what the funding is going to be every year. That's just the way it works. It makes no sense. It's just the way things exist in this state. When you look at the changes in the amounts of money that we get per student, depending on how many other students are in the building with them, it does make sense, but it doesn't make sense in every case. When we close a school and send them to other buildings, we wind up losing funding. But we also lose buildings that need a lot of repair. And we lose a certain amount of administrative staff and we can put that money to instructional staff. It becomes a very complicated thing to juggle. I think our professional staff has done a marvelous job of it in terms of bringing us the recommendations. So I am trying to tell people there's a push and a pull every which way you look at this. And certainly a push and a pull from the community, a push and a pull from the finances. And lastly, ASD is in a deficit crisis almost every year. I think 17 out of the last 20. I've been around about 20, 25 years watching it. And there've been a few years where we weren't frightened to death about what the budget was going to be. And the amount changes every year. But it's a Hail Mary over and over and over again. And it just gets that way. I hesitate to not do what I think is the right thing because of an immediate funding crisis. I think this is justifiable. I think it makes sense. The part about rebuilding the school rather than just closing it and moving the students is that it really moves them quite a ways, and it blows up a program that's functioning very well, the IB program. There's not a way to relocate that neatly and have everybody go with it anywhere close to where Inlet View is. And I will say in the other schools that were identified for closure by our staff, they did a pretty good job of picking places where students could largely be kept together or a whole program could be moved from one building to another. And it wouldn't be as good. We were only doing it to try to save money. We weren't trying to improve things. But I think they looked really carefully at the long-term outcome. And I think when you look at the long-term outcome, we want a building, we want a school where Inlet View is, and we want a school that's going to last a long time. I don't foresee that neighborhood drying up and people moving away anytime soon. I think it's going to stay about like it is, or maybe get slightly more dense, but we need a building there. It's having great success. I wish there was a way to put it off because of the financial situation we're facing at the moment, but I don't think the financial situation is ever going to go away, really, honestly. So again, I will be supporting the S version. And we have a little bit of a safety line as the year before us unfolds. And of course, there'll be a bond vote. And if the bond's not approved, this wouldn't be enough to do what we need to do. So we will be able to walk back very awkwardly if we have to. And on we go. But I do think this has been the right idea and continues to be the right idea, and I will vote yes on it.
Thank you very much, Member Holloman. So I think everybody has spoken except for me. My recollection, I mean, I'm a little surprised that 151 in either form resulted in a rehashing of build versus remodel, because we said we would rebuild Inlet View. We also put the money from the state, we classified it, this board moved it to capital funds. That's where we put it so we could come back to it. So for me, we are coming back around. I actually forgot that at our last meeting. And I had a slightly different response to the S version. But it's $26 million. It is a lot of money. It's not going to build the school, but it gives us a path toward the school. And so for me, in my mind, the rebuild is what we have agreed to. If you look at our CIP, it's a rebuild. It's not a remodel. We had the discussion and we move forward with the recommendation for a rebuild. So that's where we are. So I don't know how we got to rehashing that. So I will be voting in favor of or in support of 151S. And we will tackle whatever the future brings for our kids. We will tackle it. We will make the best decision possible. This is one step closer to what we know these kids need. So Amanda,
Madam President.
would you, oh, yes, Member Donnelly?
Thank you. I just wanted to state for the record that I think it's really important we capture these federal funds for the Ursa Major. It's a really great offer from the federal government. If it was a separate vote, I'd be voting for that. And I'm going to take the representation of our officials, from our administrative staff, that there was a time factor here, because I did request anything in writing that indicated that. They didn't have it, but they represented to me before the meeting that there was an oral statement at the meeting with the Department of Defense that we had to come up with this money, this proposal within 90 days. So given that, especially, I would support moving forward with Ursa Major at this time. So if my vote on this, I want to be clear that I would support Ursa Major at this time.
Thank you. And that was, yeah, that 80-20 split with the Department of Defense is, I don't know that I've seen that lately. Anyway, we ready to vote? The vote before you, the motion before you is to approve memo 151S. Amanda?
Member Holloman,
Yes.
Member Donnelly,
No.
Member Higgins,
Yes.
Member Jacobs,
Yes.
Member Wilson,
Yes.
President Bellamy,
Yes. And that motion passes 5-1. All right, we are moving on. Thank you. Good debate. Appreciate it. We're moving on now to item F2, memorandum number 158.
Madam President, I move to approve ASD Memorandum number 158, a board policy revision to 5131.6.
Second.
Moved in second to approve memorandum number 158. We have two speakers. Let me get their names. Michael Carson. Welcome, Michael. And we have John Green. Come, have a seat. Good evening.
First things first.
Up your mic.
Kelsey's
There you
list.
go. Your mic wasn't on. There it is. It's on now.
First things first. Thank you for the opportunity to advocate and support Kelsey's lesson to be voted into policy for drug education and prevention for all middle school and high school students, and to assure that we keep our youth safe, healthy, and thriving. The facts and data regarding the opiate epidemic, especially with fentanyl, are screaming at us to provide our youth with the most honest, current, and accurate information to save their lives. Kelsey's lesson demonstrates the basic neuroscience of how opioids hack and whack the brain, with the potential of leading to an addiction, beginning with tolerance and dependence. This lesson is aligned with the national health standards in participation and partnership with Carmen Ashley, Division Director of Adolescent Health, Dr. Jay Butler, and Dr. Chris Jones with the CDC. Kelsey's lesson is dedicated to Kelsey Green, along with many other youth that have experienced addiction and have lost their lives due to overdose and poisonings. We know that there is no current health curriculum that addresses opioids, much less fentanyl. In addition, there's no current resources for teachers to access information on fentanyl from the learning e-modules from DEED. That updated information will not be available for a number of years. We cannot wait. Lives hang in the balance. Due to these unfortunate facts, I've added an addendum to Kelsey's lesson titled Fentanyl with the most current drug reports, i.e. 6 out of 10 counterfeit pills have a potential lethal overdose. These also provide facts for parents and schools. Yes, parents are a vital partner in battling opioids, with parents being their children's first teachers and schools being an insurance policy for all middle school and high school students. Hence, the only safe prescription drugs have to come from a doctor or licensed pharmacist. Every drug from heroin, cocaine, meth, along with Percocet, Xanax, oxys, and even Adderall contaminated with fentanyl. And our youth are using all these contaminated drugs. In short, it has become an opioid roulette with Nightmare Alley. We can't afford to say, not my kid. Finally, thank you for your vote for Kelsey's lesson into policy and your efforts to keep our youth to live their fullest potential. Thank you.
And thank you very much. Right. Mr. Green.
John Green.
John Green.
Is that on?
No, it's not on. It'll look like that when it's on. See, there it is.
There we go. My name is John
Welcome.
Green. I'm Kelsey Green's dad. Thank you for this opportunity to testify and advocate for Kelsey's lesson to be taught in the Anchorage School District. My daughter Kelsey was a heroin addict for 6 years, but her use of drugs began when she was 14 and she began self-medicating with pot and pills after becoming a victim of rape. Kelsey died in the Anchorage Correctional Complex from complications of heroin withdrawal 5 days after she was arrested. She was 24 years old. A couple of months before she died, on a good day, I took her dinner and we had a long talk. She told me that all she was taught in school about drugs was that they were bad. She said that she was told that you can get addicted, but was never told what addiction meant. She was told that if you quit, you can have withdrawals, but no one ever explained what that was. In the end, it was withdrawal that killed her. She said that if she had only known, she would never have started. I've spoken to many recovering addicts and families whose sons and daughters have died because of their addiction. When I asked them what they knew before the addiction, I was told by all the same story. They never knew the truth about addiction and were never told. The addictiveness and deadliness of the drugs today, including fentanyl, is many more times than the drugs from the 80s that many of us remember. If you survive today's drugs, you are many more times likely to become addicted. And for many, death is considered a relief rather than the pain of going through withdrawal. Yet our lessons to our kids about addiction is the same as it always has been. Drugs are bad, okay? And nothing more. Kelsey told me that night that she wanted to write a book and give it to schools, telling the truth about addiction, the lengths you would go to for the next fix, and the sheer torture of withdrawals when all you wanted to do is be free from the beast that won't let you go. She wanted to give it to the schools and use it for free, to use for free. I shared this conversation with Michael, and after much work, research, and collaboration, we have Kelsey's lesson. For me, it's a fulfillment of a promise to my daughter to tell her story so that maybe even one family won't have to live her story or our pain. This lesson is for parents too. I learned, like so many, the hard way: don't ever say not my kid, and kids, don't ever say it won't happen to me. I'm asking that you vote Kelsey's lesson into policy and that it be taught during Red Ribbon Week each year, and perhaps at the end of the school year when kids may be tempted to party and need to understand the consequences of trying even one pill one time. Again, I thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you very much.
Are there any questions from any board members?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The motion is to approve revisions to board policy 1531.6. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank Mr. Green and Mr. Carson for being present tonight, as well as Mr. Carson for his partnership for getting us to this point and updating a board policy that I think administration, I think it's my first change to board policy that didn't require any tweak from administration. So we got something right. And it's exciting, frankly. You know, aside from youth who are looking for a good time to engage in alcohol or other drugs, including opioids, I work with a subset of population, as does Member Wilson, that are plagued by mental health challenges. And one of the many innovations through the pandemic was the option to get your groceries delivered, get your food delivered. Unfortunately, now for the first time, at least in my home, I'm seeing the availability for youth to receive substances illicitly delivered by grown adults. that will literally just drop it right at your door. And so this isn't something the district has the resources or time to crack down on. Certainly, I, as a parent, don't have enough eyes in the back of my head to constantly make sure that the youth in my home are engaging in safe choices, both in and outside of the walls of my home. And so education really is our way out of this. And I'm excited to hear, as we heard at the recent work session of the governance committee, that Dr. Strumpler Johnson is interested in coalition building, engaging community partners to really put a dent in some of the opportunity and awareness gaps that exist, and make sure that we're addressing this at the school level, especially before it gets to be too late. And so this is something that the legislature is contemplating through House Bill 6. The language of this board policy would implement 1 hour of required education on the science of addiction annually, and a whole host of other things, such as the dangers of opioid misuse. And so this really legitimizes the key tenets of Kelsey's lesson, and I'm looking forward to see how ASD administration implements it. Would encourage, obviously, a yes vote on this, and am hoping to see this at a future Red Ribbon Week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Member Higgins?
I just want to express my appreciation to the testimony, for someone that's going through the tragedy like that, trying to make a positive difference for others, is most impressive, and I'm very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Member Wilson?
I basically want to echo what has already been stated, but thank you to Mr. Green and Mr. Carson for coming. Thank you for your testimony, but more importantly, thank you for the work. Sorry. As Member Jacob stated, I've worked with kiddos who have dealt with many different traumas for a very, very long time. So thank you for your work.
Yeah. Thank you. Seeing no other comments, let's vote. The vote before you is to approve revisions to BP 5131.6.
Member Donley,
Yes.
Member Higgins,
Yes.
Member Holloman,
Yes.
Member Jacobs,
Yes.
Member Wilson,
Yes.
President Bellamy.
Yes. And that passes 6-0. Thank you, guys. And now we're moving on to item 3, F3. Memorandum 156. Member Donnelly, I believe you pulled it.
Madam President, I move to approve ASD Memorandum number 156, approval of transfer to Health Insurance Fund for FY22, 2023.
There's a second?
Second.
Moved in second. Member Donnelly, I believe you pulled 156.
Thank you, Madam President. Just think that $6 million expenditure deserves some discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Bryant?
Through the president. Sure, we're happy to provide additional context for why this expense is an expenditure that will serve the needs of our employees. I'll ask the Chief Human Resources Officer, Mr. Lang, to speak further.
Madam President.
Yes.
Decided to come forward so I could see Member Donnelly through the poll here and engage in some dialogue as needed. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to acknowledge this memo and speak to it and provide some additional context. We do recognize that this is a sizable fund transfer to balance what has been an incredibly expensive claims experience year for us in the ASD health plan. So as I briefed the board a couple of times over the last couple of months, we have seen coming out of the pandemic 2 years of high claims experience. We are also starting to experience inflationary pressures on the health plan. And when I came into the job in January, my team immediately started briefing me and letting me know that at that point we had already exhausted the limited reserves that we usually maintain around the ASD health plan, and that we were on target at that point to maybe be as much as $7.5 million underwater by the end of the year. Early in the year, mid-year, we were experiencing claims month over month that were running about 125% of what was originally projected for this claims year. And so it was looking really dire. If there's any good news in this memo, it is that we have had a couple of months of better claims experiences that have backed off from that number. So fortunately, we're just looking at $6 million and not $7.5 million. So since that news was shared with me when I first came into the position, I've been asking a lot of questions too. You know, is this a failure of the ASD health plan? What's going on here? Why are we in this particular situation? And it's been interesting to kind of unpack the history. So if you don't mind, I'll just remind the board briefly of some of the history. We started this self-funded plan in 2010. And the general guidance is that any organization that has more than 400 employees, a self-funded plan is often a good option because you can save around 2% right off the top of what insurance companies otherwise would charge for administering a fully funded plan. And so we started in 2010, and by 2012, 3 years into that experience, we had amassed a reserve actually of about $10 million. And at that point, during a municipal audit, they said that was probably too large of a reserve for us to be maintaining. Member Higgins may remember this. He was on the board at the time. They said, really, because we have a general fund for the district, we already have a backstop, and we didn't need to maintain a large reserve around the health plan itself because we always have the general fund if we had an exceptional year with claims experiences. And so over the next couple of years, we spent down that reserve, and since that time have been operating a pretty limited reserve of about $1 million or $2 a year, per year. And that has buffered us in years where we've had a little bit higher claims experience and allowed us to build the reserve back up in years when we've had a little bit lower claims experience. So fast forward to today, coming out of the pandemic, I think as most people are aware, we have had, most plans have seen significant claims experiences. And so we burned through what reserves we had coming out of the pandemic. And, this was a pretty exceptional year. I will note that this is the second time since 2010 that the plan has operated this way, where we have moved beyond the limited reserve and have had to come to the board. In 2016, there was also a memo to transfer a couple $1 million to balance the health fund for that year. So I would say the plan, this is unfortunate, but it is the way that our plan is designed to operate. So I'll pause there to see what questions there are. And
thank you. Any other questions? Member Donnelly.
Are there any plans to adjust the amount of reserve that we maintain based on this experience?
So there is a draft reserve policy that has been put together over the last couple of years and had a legal review. We just haven't finalized that. So I do have a plan to continue to work on that and hopefully bring something before the board next year for approval, so that we can maybe find that happy medium where we maintain a little bit larger reserve, or we have some triggers that are already pre-built in when we're experiencing really high claims experiences that we can turn on to address those higher claims experiences in those years. We also, I'll note, just like we did in 2016, we took a look at plan structure this year, and we made a couple of structural changes in order to try to reduce the costs next year. So hopefully we don't find ourselves in a similar situation. We're already seeing claims experiences taper off, like a lot of health plans across the industry have this year. So I'm more hopeful that we won't be in the same situation, same boat next year.
I'm really glad to hear that. That really helps me with this vote, to hear that we're making an effort to try to mitigate this in the future, this potential exposure. Because it just couldn't happen at a worse time. I don't think we've ever seen such a high projected deficit out for not this coming year, but the next year. So, and I understand these are ESSER funds, but still, it's a lot of money.
Member Higgins and then Member Jacobs.
Yeah, I look forward to getting into more discussions with this, the potential risk versus the buy-off. But it's more than that. If I buy car insurance and I have a wreck and the car insurance, the company knows that everything comes out of my pocket, they're not going to fight the same way as if it's coming out of their pocket. They don't have, how much resources are they going to spend on trying to look for things and going things when there's no reward for it, no benefit, no incentive at all. And I know that working with insurance companies and being involved in benefits for so long, that's the issue. So I look forward to taking a careful review of this. The 3% can be more than offset in so many ways by looking at analyzing how to be competitive on the cost and what we can do to maintain it. And insurance companies get motivated for that, and that's what we need. So I appreciate your discussion with it. I look forward to having more.
Marty, is the actual amount greater than we expected? Because I'm not surprised, because when we had the presentation before with you and we had a work session.
We had Ty Walty here, who's the Senior Director of Benefits.
And at that time, it was, I mean, we were going to have a deficit. We just didn't know the size of it. So I think this is a little more than the 4 or whatever amount we thought we'd have.
So we do have a little bit of headroom built in this because we don't have the claims experience yet for May and for June, which will be the last 2 months of this claims year. And so we wanted to make sure that we built enough into this memo that we could cover those if those end up being high months as well. And if they're not, then that does build us a small reserve to start with for next year.
All right, thanks. Just so that it's not the first time we've discussed this. Other comments? Oh, Member Jacob, sorry.
Fine. Thank you, Madam President. So, and I was hoping to, because I think there was some confusion as to this being the first time this was discussed. We had an entire work session on this and it's come up a couple different times now. Could you remind the board the intersection between the conversation here tonight and then what I believe is us potentially as a district examining whether or not we go out to market and regarding either being self-insured or adopting some other form of a plan, and what work is still being done there?
Yeah, so on the immediate horizon, our plan is next fall to put an RFP out for a third-party administrator. So currently our claims are managed by Aetna. And we are going to, we've been with them for a considerable amount of time. We've gotten pretty good value through them, we believe, but we want to engage in a competitive process and put that bid out. And we will solicit that with anybody in Alaska that we believe can provide, a response to that bid.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President.
Anything you want to add, Dr. Bryant, before we? All right, so let's call the vote.
Member Higgins? Member Holloman?
Yes.
Member Jacobs?
Yes.
Member Wilson?
Yes.
Member Donnelly?
Yes.
President Bellamy?
Yes. And that passes 6-0. Thank you. And that brings us, we have no more public comment at this time. Superintendent update.
All right. Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, ASD community and the school board. Really, I just want to say it's hard to believe that the year has flown by. It's been my first year here. I'm going into my 11th month as superintendent, and I feel truly grateful to be here. I've certainly learned a lot, but it was really nice to know that feeling that, you take a vacation and you're back on the plane and you're headed home. I actually felt that as I was on the plane back to Anchorage. I thought, oh, I'm returning home. And that's something I didn't think I would feel as quickly as I did, but it's truly been quite a year. So really, as I look ahead, this next year, or these next few months rather, will be about reflection and planning for our major initiatives that are ahead, including late start Mondays and monitoring our bus transportation staffing. So we are actively recruiting drivers and will proactively communicate updates to the community as things progress. As we kind of round out this year, I will note that there have been quite a few challenges, but the resilience and strength of our ASD community is incredible. Everything from the transportation crisis to the Ursa Major relocation to snowpocalypse, and more things that happened over the course of the year. Our community answered the call to action to support the schools and student learning. So we've asked a lot from families and staff and community members this year, and I want to recognize everything that you do for our students. So looking ahead, there are positive things on the horizon. We'll continue to keep an eye on the board's goals and guardrails by investing in staff professional learning, our new curricular materials, and our exciting multi-year college, career, and life readiness transformation. I also want to note that we've put some proactive measures in place for student transportation this year, including increasing wages earlier this year, offering summer jobs for our drivers, and asking staff earlier than ever before their intent to return. But we still have work to do to ensure we have enough drivers on the first day of school. So please spread the word that ASD needs drivers, and you can visit our website at asdk12.org/work-for-ASD to apply for those and other positions too, including paraprofessionals and other high need roles. A couple other things. So there are other things on the horizon. So as the community and this board is aware, we did pass a balanced budget going into this upcoming school year, but we do need to plan for fiscal year 25. Once the governor signs off on the budget, we'll have a sense of what that budget development process will look like. Our best case scenario is the budget is signed off as it is. And that would mean, though, even if we got the best case scenario and ASD applied all of those one-time funds to next year's deficit, the FY25 deficit, we'd still need to slash the budget by tens of millions of dollars. So all of that to say, there's work to be done, and we'll keep the community informed on our options. And then to close on a lighter note, while there's no guarantee that another snowpocalypse won't occur next school year, we now have structures in place to support remote learning. So in the meanwhile, enjoy the sunshine while it's here. And that concludes my report.
All right. Thank you. Questions for the superintendent on his report or anything else? I know I can't stop y'all. All right. Thank you, Dr. Bryant. Let's move on to board member comments. Actually, I do have one, and I can put it in, I'll put it in in writing, but I do think we need to have a plan for revisiting our boundaries, or at least reviewing them prior to the next budget. I don't know, what do we want to call it? Discussion. I'll call it a discussion.
Yeah, I agree. That would be prudent, especially as we look towards sixth grade to middle school and other changes. And it'll be important for us to look at that information to make some important decisions ahead. So we'll note that.
And I'll send it in writing so we can prioritize as we normally do. Thank you. All right. Member comments. We're going to start with Member Higgins. Going to my left today.
Well,
Closing comments.
I'll start by just simply saying this has been a pretty active year. And if the superintendent feels like this year was rough, I just want to tell him that this was not a particularly cold winter. So I just want to lay that out for you so you can be aware of that within it. I do appreciate all the conversations tonight. I realize that you can't always agree with anything, with everybody. On all issues, but they all have some merit, and I appreciate the discussion that took place. Both those that spoke both sides of the coins on different issues. I think that was really great. And with that, I'm going to actually limit my conversation tonight. That I know that Some of you may be in shock, but yep, that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Member Higgins. Member Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be brief as well. Just wanted to thank the board for a good year. We, of course, have a retreat and then a bit of a small break, which maybe it's my imagination, maybe it's not, but seems to be getting smaller and smaller every year before our August meeting. I think my takeaway from tonight, and I guess our last few meetings, especially when it comes to goal monitoring, is how important our staff are, and ensuring that we at this table are doing everything we can to continue to support them. And so that's what I'm going to reflect on in the absence of our board meetings, and would invite others to do the same. Thank you.
And thank you. Yes, Member Donnelly.
I'm very concerned that this changing of how we measure our academic progress is really making it difficult to evaluate whether we're making that progress or not. And that 18% difference in the assessment of proficiency in reading, it really concerns me. And I certainly hope the community, you know, if we start talking about, well, we're 58% proficient, the community's educated, that's under a new calculation that even according to the explanation tonight, the experts can't explain why there's a difference. So we need to keep our eye on the ball on reading and really focus on getting our kids reading by third grade and keeping and not congratulate ourselves that it's because we changed how we measured it. All of a sudden there was this increase. Also, I guess the board voted tonight for about $51 million worth of expenditures, and at some point we're just going to have to slow down and rein that in. I mean, we can't keep doing that before we get a better idea of what kind of a budget gap we're faced with for the 24-25 school year. We just have to realize that we're not going to have that kind of money available. We have to start really slowing down on expenditure funds.
Okay. Thank you, Member Donnelly. Member Holloman. Closing comments?
Don't think I have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Member Wilson.
I have a couple things. Our communications committee will start back up in August, so we'll take a break for summer as well. ASD is coordinating and accepting donations for a backpack and school supply distribution, and that will take place on July 22nd from noon to 4 here at the Ed Center. So if any businesses want to donate backpacks, school supplies, I think the goal is to reach about 5,000 students. So I'm super excited about that. And we'll be helping to try to recruit some businesses for that as well. And as Dr. Bryant said, we have a lot of messaging and we'll start earlier this year, starting with the bus driver updates in phase 1 of the school start times, as well as new academic programs. I also wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Peter Lubicic. He is, and it took me years to say his last name, just so we're clear. He's the gifted education supervisor, or I should say was the gifted education supervisor. He was an Anchorage School District employee for 25 years and just retired. So congratulations to Peter. He was my son's Ignite teacher, gosh, about 16 years ago. And my son and many other students still talk about the amazing projects that Mr. L taught them, as he was known by the kids and parents for many years, was Mr. L. So he's earned a great retirement, but he will be missed. So I hope everybody has a fantastic summer.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Yes, we are having our retreat on Friday, the 16th from 3 to 7, and Saturday, all day on Saturday. So that's 9 to 4 on Saturday. We will provide snacks and at least a meal for Saturday. Snacks on light snacks on Friday night, but Saturday we'll have a lunch together. I will send out the agenda. I finally finalized it today, actually. Our theme is preparing the workforce for tomorrow. And Kathy's got all kinds of good ideas over there. Her and Amanda and Katie are up to their shenanigans. And I love it. The other thing is that we will be hosting the joint meeting with the Assembly on Friday, this Friday, 10 to 12. Prior to that, at 8:30, we have what is it, Safe Routes? And I think Carl and Andy are our representatives on that Safe Routes committee, but any board member who would like to join, you can. So with that, that ends my my housekeeping things. And so we are now, any other comments from any staff or superintendent? You guys good? All right. Okay. Sorry.
Madam President, move to adjourn.
Moved and second to adjourn. Hearing and seeing no opposition. Good night.